Notre Dame fans, Irish Breakdown fans, IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. That's Trevor Trowbridge. I'm Brian Driscoll, and we are back ready to talk some more Notre Dame football. Trev, we have so many kind of fun, exciting topics to talk about Notre Dame this summer, and one of the ones that you and I wanted to get in early is after we kind of did the breakout stars and the star players and the breakout players, which are kind of a positive. We kind of wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about some different types of players on the Notre Dame team. And one of those is the players on this Notre Dame football team that are most underappreciated and underrated. And we're going to get into some specific players. But I think before we talk about that, Trev, I think we're going to dive into, or I don't think, we are going to dive into some of the reasons why Notre Dame has a high, what I believe to be a higher percentage of underrated and underappreciated players nationally, but also some by the fan base. And we're going to dive into that. So we'll go offense first, defense second. And then the third segment of the show, we're going to talk about Notre Dame's transfer portal pickup class and how that is another example of how Notre Dame continues to kind of be disrespected. Its roster continues to be disrespected and why it matters, why these things matter. And then, of course, at the end of the day, if we have enough time, we'll get a mailbag in. So if you want to get some mailbag questions in, go ahead and hit that MB on there, put a mailbox emoji on there, get that question in. And if we have time at the end of the day, we'll get to it. Before we begin, if you all want to help us out, see there's a little thumbs up. It's going to be a great show. So you're going to like it. I mean, unless you're just in here and you're a hater or whatever the case may be, you're going to love this show. It's going to be a lot of fun. So go ahead and hit that thumbs up for us now. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you're listening via podcast platform, we would love a 5-star review. That just helps us with the algorithm, spreading the sucker around, making sure more Notre Dame fans get this. And, of course, as always, great conversation happening over at boards.irishbreakdown.com. But, Trev, I want to first dive into I mistakenly felt that Notre Dame going 14-2 and having some of the impressive players that they had to go 14-2, the fact that they're 14-2 was so hard-earned, meaning you lost your starting left tackle, you lost your starting center, you lost your replacement to your starting left tackle, you lost you lost your starting defensive end, you lost his backup, you lost the starting defensive tackle at the beginning of the playoff, you lost one of your top reserves 5 games into the season, you lost your All-American cornerback 6 games into the season. Then you get into the playoffs and your star running back is banged up. You lose your star defensive tackle in the first game. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, okay, they're going to finally understand how deep this football team is, how talented this football team is. And while I believe there is obviously some respect for this Notre Dame football team in the preseason, if you're a preseason top 10 team, there's some level of respect for you. But in almost every case, almost every single case, and I believe that Andy Staples, so far that I can see, is the only exception to the rule, Notre Dame is consistently the 4th lowest team of the 4 semifinal teams last season in preseason rankings, despite the fact returning more production and more starters than everybody except maybe Penn State, a team that they beat head-to-head last season. And I think it just speaks to the consistent and the continued lack of respect that Notre Dame gets. Now, this has been great for Marcus Freeman and Mike Denbrock and Al Golden. And you're hearing more people talk about Notre Dame losing Al Golden than you heard. I mean, like, people talk about him gone as if like they just lost their head football coach and their entire staff like Michigan did 2 years ago. But boy, just what a great coach Marcus Freeman is and Mike Denbrock is and Al Golden is. And my answer is, well, yeah, they are. But they weren't coaching a bunch of stiffs last year to the national championship game. They're great coaches who had really talented players that they led to the national championship game. But you look at it and it's like, no, it's all coaching. And I don't know how they're going to repeat that without Al Golden next year. And there's still this disrespect for the Notre Dame roster that and I think it's still even not prominent. It's not as prominent as it used to be amongst Notre Dame fans. But even with certain Notre Dame fans, there's still this level of not fully appreciating how good the roster is. And then, of course, there's some underappreciation and lack of respect for certain players. But it has – I'll be honest with you, Trev, and you know this more than anybody knows this about how frustrated I am because you and Sean Davis are usually the people that I text about this when I'm getting mad. I still get annoyed. I was looking at the transfer portal rankings last night, which is why we're going to ESPN updated their transfer portal rankings, and that's why we're going to talk about that in the show. And I'm just thinking, you guys are still on this thing, huh? You guys still think Notre Dame is just this mediocre team. I read these things. They talk more about Steve Angeli and the 3 offensive linemen they lost than they do Leonard Moore or Jeremiah Love in these ESPN articles. And it's just further evidence of this team just still doesn't get respect. And I'll explain after Trevor comments why I think it matters. Doesn't matter when it comes to winning and losing and things like that, but it still matters from a perception standpoint. Perception still impacts your team in certain areas, but it gets a little bit frustrating, but it also points back to the show we did last week, Trev, that Notre Dame still has a lot of respect it has to earn and gain. My concern, however, is if you continue to look at Notre Dame this way, barring a winning at all, you're never going to get the respect that you deserve for being a premier team and having a premier roster.
Yeah, when you look at the way that Notre Dame is viewed nationally and by a minority group of fans, it comes down to a couple things. First and foremost, you can look at how Notre Dame completed last year, and there's 2 different trains of thought. And one of them can be, look, man, this is a great coaching staff. This is a deep team. This is the result of multiple years stacked on top of each other of great, intentional, targeted recruiting. You can see that Marcus Freeman is trying to build out a specific roster that tailors how he wants his football team ran. Or you can also look at it from the side of, man, some teams just have that magical season and they catch fire at the right time. And that's what happened with Notre Dame. How can you make it to the national championship losing Ben Morrison and Riley Mills and Howard Cross banged up and Charles Jagasaw and Ashton Craig and, Jason Onye and half of these other guys were banged up most of the year. And so there's 2 different ways that you can look at it. But unfortunately, now the thing that we're seeing is the narrative still isn't going away. Some of the narrative, I'm looking at this from an outsider's perspective, some of the narrative is valid, but you have to evaluate this team for what it is. Because like we've said in previous shows, Notre Dame has followed every season up with either a playoff appearance or a national championship appearance with somewhat of a dud, disappointing season. And I think that is some of the narrative that they are still playing on. To our point last week in the show that Notre Dame does still have something to prove, this season they have to prove that last season wasn't that Cinderella story. Everything was just right. But the thing where I get frustrated is why doesn't that get applied to other teams? Why don't people talk about that with Ohio State? You want to talk about stars aligning. They had like 17 seniors in that class that had been a part of the program for 4 or 5 years. You go and play Tennessee at home with Dylan Sampson leaving the game halfway through the first quarter with no hamstring. How many times have we gone back and looked at, okay, typically when teams have a rematch with each other, the team that lost the first game typically wins the second game. You start talking about Texas in that Texas game. It's like, okay, maybe bailed out a little bit by Steve Sarkisian. Now, all of these things I don't believe. Ohio State, I said in yesterday's show, was the hottest team in the playoffs.
They earned the national championship. Your point is about why are they not applying the same criteria they used to talk down Notre Dame to then also do the same thing to Ohio State?
We're talking about Notre Dame, not we, but a lot of national media pundits are talking about Notre Dame had this magical season and then ranking them behind a team in, say, like an LSU or an Alabama, and both teams didn't make the playoffs last season. Yes, I have LSU ranked high as well. I don't have them ranked above Notre Dame. I don't really have them that close to Notre Dame. And so that's where the frustration lies for me. And it comes down to a couple things, man. Look, I've been saying this all offseason. Some of it is the product on the field and what you see. We, as members who evaluate the team week in and week out, we can talk about points per game and yards per play and offensive efficiency rating and the Fremeau efficiency index. And we can talk about the ESPN FPI. But to the majority of people, fans, and a lot of the members that cover it in the media just kind of look at, well, they don't do it passing the ball, so Notre Dame is just handicapped. Their ceiling is here because it doesn't look super cool. And to a lot of other people, Notre Dame is that team that will just have the stout defense and a good run game, essentially the same team that they've been to a lot of people since 2017. And that's where the frustration lies, because we see CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey spinning that thing at practice. We know what Malachi Fields did coming in. We, along with the rest of the country, watch what Jaden Greathouse did in the semifinals and the national championship of the college football playoffs. But all of that seems to be forgotten because it doesn't fit the narrative.
There it is. That word right there, narrative. And people say, well, look, Notre Dame just has to go out there and win and prove it. And I'm so tired of that. I'm so tired of just that giving in to the narrative, because it's just easier to say, well, they just got to go out and prove it. Fine. If you want to compare Notre Dame to Georgia or Ohio State or Clemson or even Bama to a degree, fine. They have to go out and prove that they can compete for a championship and win a championship to be considered on the same level of those teams. Fine. But what's the excuse for giving Texas that kind of bump? What's the excuse for giving Penn State that kind of bump and Oregon that kind of bump? And that's my frustration is. And so if Notre Dame goes out there and wins again this year, it's going to be this, like let's say they go to the title game and lose it again. They'll start getting a little bit more respect, but you'll still see some of the same stuff. Well, they had a weak schedule. They did this. They got lucky beating this team by 13. They got lucky beating this team by 20. And, oh, wow, what a great coach Marcus Freeman is, which he is, or at least he's proving himself to be. And I've always said it's got to be about talent and coaching. It can't just be about one. You don't make a run to the title game in spite of your coaches. You also don't make a run to the title game in a 12-team playoff in spite of your roster. Like, nobody's that good of a coach. And that's the frustration for me, is because I'm tired of the narrative that every time Notre Dame does something great, it's like, well, A&M's not as good as we thought. Or everyone who's hyping up Miami. If Notre Dame goes down there and beats Miami in the opener, it's going to be, well, Miami hasn't done anything. Their roster's not that good. Mario Cristobal's not that good of a coach. There'll be some excuse to talk it down. And the other way around, if it happens to somebody else, if Texas goes down there and beats somebody good, or Alabama does, or Ohio State does, it's like, oh man, what a great win for that team. What a great win for USC to beat LSU. That, I felt like, to some, that got talked more about than Notre Dame beating A&M. So it's very frustrating, Trevor, to have that narrative exist, and no matter, and when you continue to talk down the roster, you continue to make excuses for why Notre Dame wins, and that's the problem. There's no reason Notre Dame should be ranked lower than all three of the other Final Four teams last season. No reason.
No, none at all. And where I get super frustrated is the spin. And there's a lot of people out there that talk about Marcus Freeman. He's such a great coach because of what he's had to coach up to get to the national championship. People use it and say, well, Marcus Freeman is winning with the same players that Brian Kelly couldn't have. And with all due respect to past Notre Dame teams, that is not the case. Show me a Notre Dame team from 2010 to 2021 that had a secondary that included players to the degree of a Leonard Moore and Christian Gray and Carson Hobbs and Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary and Adon Schuler and Jadon Blair and Luke Talich. Like, show me that team from that window. So, yes, there is truth to Marcus Freeman is winning at a program that Brian Kelly couldn't take it to, but he's doing it with different players. And Marcus Freeman is being highlighted as a great coach, which he is, but it's not for the talent that he's attracting. It's the whole he's doing more with less thing, which I can't stand, which then continues to feed into they got Jeremiah Love, but what a rare get for Notre Dame. It's like, are we forgetting about the past running backs that have came through Notre Dame in the last decade? I guess that's a thing now, but then you have other teams that get a guy from the transfer portal that put up decent stats in a group of 5 conference. They're like, yeah, it's a completely whole different outlook on this team, and they're probably going to win the national championship. It's like, okay, sounds good. So that's where I get frustrated, is the spin of Marcus Freeman is winning with players Brian Kelly couldn't. No, Marcus Freeman is bringing in players that Brian Kelly couldn't, and then winning with them. So
Marcus Freeman's bringing players that Brian Kelly wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't willing to do. But yes, I mean, we talked about this last year. Very little of last year's roster was a roster that was built from the previous staff. Very, very little of last year's roster. So that's not even worth discussing at this point in time, beyond what you've already done. So that's kind of where the topic sort of transitions to, is when your roster as a whole gets underappreciated and doesn't get respected. then of course you're going to have a high number of players that don't get the national respect that they deserve. And, the other thing too is that I think goes here is it's further evidence that people still obsess way too much about recruiting rankings when guys are in college. And I'm going to talk about this in the portal section, but just a little hint. The fact that Zechariah Branch was considered the second best portal player, portal receiver this year, and was considered a top 10 portal player on ESPN is evidence that they're just going off recruiting rankings. And that is it. And yet a guy that's had back-to-back 800-yard seasons in a Power 4 league is not getting that same love. Do we really think that if Malachi, let's be real about something. If Malachi Fields transferred to LSU or Texas or Ohio State, do you really think he'd be considered not even a top 40 transfer portal player according to ESPN? Like, do you really think that? Well, Brian, they didn't know where he was going to go when he jumped in the portal. Yes, they did. Everybody knew where he was going when he jumped into the portal. And so those things just really just get on my last nerve, Trev. And yeah, it does bother me that there are still people in this profession who get paid to do things and just are super lazy with it. That bothers me. It's disrespectful, in my opinion, to the profession that we're in to have people that just do such lazy stuff, just lazy stuff. And then people take it because it's ESPN. It's like everybody hates ESPN, but everybody buys into the narratives that ESPN goes with. You ever notice that? It drives me nuts. And, the media. Well, you guys are basically believing what the media is telling you. So who's the real dummies? We are. So it's just really frustrating, Trev. And I don't mind Notre Dame having to win a championship to be considered on the same level as Ohio State and teams that have won Georgia and won championships as a program. It's different saying, okay, Notre Dame's 2014 was better than Georgia's 2014. That's a fact. That's not even debatable. Had a better record, beat them head to head, led, I think Georgia led very little of that game. They led 3-0 at one point in time. It's the only lead they ever had in that game. Notre Dame took a lead late in the first half and never looked back. And it's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't mean that Notre Dame's a better program than Georgia if we're talking about this holistically, because they're not. They still have a lot to prove to be considered to have a better program than Georgia on the field. Yes, you beat them head-to-head in one season, but that was their worst season out of 4. And then the other 3, they won 2 titles and went 13-1. So you still have a lot to prove against them. My issue is, why is Texas getting the benefit of the doubt? Why is Penn State getting the benefit of the doubt? Why are they perennially overhyped every year? Why is Oregon getting the benefit of the doubt? That's my frustration. And why is LSU? Well, they won in title in 19. How many coaches on LSU staff right now are on that 2019 team? I think maybe 1 who's come back. How many players were on that 19 title team? I don't want to hear it. This coach is not the one that did that. So it gets frustrating. It gets really frustrating. So anyway, that's kind of our rant about that. Next, we're going to talk about, Trev, more on the topic of what we really wanted to dive into today. And that is, there are some players on the Notre Dame football team that we feel are either underappreciated or underrated. Those two terms kind of mean the same thing, but there's also some differences between it, either by the national media or, in some cases, Notre Dame fans. And in even some fewer cases, both. And there are also players that are just not underappreciated or underrated, but they're underappreciated and underrated, and yet they're going to be players that Notre Dame is going to rely very heavily on this season to be key contributors to a team that is going to try to compete for a championship. And it's those players that are the ones that step in when guys go down and help you weather the storm and continue to win, or give you impact plays and never quite get the love. And so we're going to talk about some of those guys, and we're going to start with the offense, Trevor. And this is going to be a little bit of a shorter conversation because there aren't a lot of these guys in the offense because that we haven't already talked about. We could talk about. I think Billy Shrout is a guy that gets a little bit underrated, underappreciated by Notre Dame fans, but we kind of talked about him last week. We could at least mention him here. I think Eli Raridan is a guy that I think is very underrated nationally, but I get it. So it's not like, oh, disrespect of Eli Raridan. Guy has 11 catches last year for like 90 yards. I get why he's not being looked at. I just think by the end of the year, he's going to prove that he is one of the better tight ends in the country. But he's not someone I look at and say, see, if he went to such and such school, he'd be getting lots of love. No, he wouldn't. No, he wouldn't. I don't think. Maybe Texas, but I don't think that he would. He's not getting love because he had 11 catches last year. So, but that's not kind of where we're coming from. But there are certainly plenty of guys that we could talk about getting underrated, underappreciated. There's some sophomores we could put on this list, Trev. But again, we're going to have our sophomore conversation on Tuesday. So just to prepare you guys for it, we're not going to make you wait weeks to talk about the sophomore class, that we keep pushing guys off. Yeah. We'll talk about that Tuesday. But when you talk about guys that are underrated and underappreciated by the national media or the fans, the first one that we're going to talk about, Trevor, is actually someone that I don't believe is being underappreciated or underrated by the national media. I actually think he gets more love from the national media, which is kind of funny that this is what we're leading with after what we just talked about the last 20 minutes. But in this case, we're talking about running back Jadarian Price, who I believe gets more love from the national media than he does from Notre Dame fans. And it's a little puzzling, and it's a little bit of a head scratcher. Not all Notre Dame fans, but I have seen more people post on social media or in our chat or on our message board about who might beat Jadarian Price out as opposed to, gee, I can't wait to see what Jadarian Price is going to do this year, or there's going to be 2,000 yard. I've seen more people talk about there might be 2,000-yard receivers at Notre Dame than people talk about potentially 2,000-yard running backs at Notre Dame, because Jadarian Price absolutely is a player that is underrated and underappreciated by Notre Dame fans. I just don't think people appreciate it in this fan base how good this kid is. Think about how many times in this chat, in our chat, which is a very educated chat. That's why people listen to this show, because they want to learn. They know the game. How many people said Jadarian Price needs to watch out or he's going to get passed up by somebody else, which is technically true. If Jadarian Price doesn't play well, the running back room is good enough to pass him up. But it was almost like he's not as good as this guy or this guy. And now that guy's not a freshman anymore, he better watch his back. And I'm thinking, boy, you really don't appreciate or understand how good this kid is, because he is a really, really good football player. Not potentially, now.
Well, there's not a position on the team, in my opinion, that you could not say that about. Like, if you don't continue to perform and work hard and reach your maximum potential day in and day out, somebody could pass you by. That's the state of the state for almost every position group at Notre Dame. Argument could be made because of how good Jadarian Price is. If Jeremiah Love this offseason was like, dude, I made it. I'm the top running back in the country. I'm good, man. People talk about me as a first-round draft pick. I'm just coast through the spring. You got 24 is waiting in the wings right behind you. But J.D. Price was one of the names that I didn't expect to come up this offseason as somebody who fans and, honestly, mostly fans just kind of start to overlook. If I was to be asked that question back in January, I would have thought, maybe despite his awesome performance with Malachi Fields coming in, maybe people would start to overlook, Greathouse to some degree, except for our guy Salty. I would have started to think that, maybe Eli Raridan starts to fall to the wayside. It's like, they got James Flanagan coming in. He's this highly touted recruit. And, Jadarian Price was not one of the players that I thought. But you look at his production from last year alone, with a quarterback and a running back ahead of him that had 17 rushing touchdowns each. Jay Love was over 1,100 rushing yards. Riley Leonard was over 900 rushing yards. And for Jadarian to still have, 746, 7 touchdowns last year, and do what he did in the moments that he did. He's one of the most explosive running backs in college football. You look at his long list of runs from last year, most of them were touchdown runs. He scored the first touchdown of the season for Notre Dame last year.
was a 46, 47-yard run. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Had a 30-plus yard run in that game taken back by a penalty that happened behind him.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had already passed the linebacker that Ashton Craig held,
Mm-hmm.
and that's when they called the penalty.
Yep.
Yeah.
You look at what he accomplished on the field last year, any team would be lucky to have 24 in their backfield as their starter.
Yeah.
Outside of maybe Penn State.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you go and you look, and Jadarian Price is probably RB1 at 99% of Power 5 schools that he transfers to.
There's a lot. Well, just look at the numbers, Trev. Like last year, there were 25 running backs in college football that had at least 100 carries that averaged 6 yards a carry or more. 25. Only 11 of those 25 were Power 4 players. Jadarian Price was one of those. Only 5 of those 11 come back next year. Jeremiah Love obviously being one of them, but one of those 5 is not Katron Allen, didn't even sniff 6 yards a carry. It's Isaac Brown from Louisville. It's Nicholas Singleton from Penn State. It's Javion Thomas from Cal, who transferred. Where did he transfer to SMU? Where did Javion Thomas transfer to? I think he went to SMU. No, looks like UCLA, committed to UCLA. And then Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Those are the other 2. 5 returning running backs in college football last year, or at the Power 4 level last year, had at least 100 carries and averaged over 6 yards a carry. Well, then you get this part of the crowd that wants to demean that. Well, yeah, but that's because he had a lot of big plays, but he was all or nothing. Okay, well, what do you mean? Yeah, and then I had somebody say, well, some media person said that like 30% of his, something like 30% of his yards came on, or 34% of his yards came on just 6 carries, something like that. And I was like, well, 30% of Jeremiah Love's yards came on like 6 carries. And if you actually put Jeremiah Love's numbers like on a, like the number of carries that Jadarian had, it's kind of similar. It's a very similar number. And yet for Jeremiah, it's, oh, what a big play back he is. Where with Jadarian Price, it's almost like it's an insult. Well, yeah, I mean, I know that he went for 65-yard touchdown against, Florida State, and I know he went for a 70-yard touchdown against Purdue, and I know he had a 47-yard touchdown against Texas A&M, and I know he had a 36-yard touchdown run against USC, but like when he wasn't making those big runs, he wasn't doing anything. And I'm like, no, that's not accurate. And what turned into what is a potentially fair criticism of Jadarian Price, where sometimes you just got to be willing to put your foot in the ground and get 2 yards. That's a fair criticism of Jadarian Price. Turns into every time he gets a negative, it's, see, look, I know that Charles Jagasaw went the wrong way and 2 defensive linemen came running through for Penn State, unblocked and tackled behind the line, but that's what I'm talking about. When he's in the game, his aura makes linemen go the wrong direction. It's clearly his fault. And so a legitimate criticism turns into this big thing where people want to downplay his performance for reasons. I think part of it is it's like with some people, there's not enough bandwidth in their minds to have respect for more than one player at a position where you normally only put one player on the field at a time. It's like you get people that, well, because I'm a CJ Carr guy, I got to downplay Kenny Minchey or vice versa. Well, because I'm a Jeremiah Love guy, I got to downplay Jadarian Price. So I can somehow convince myself that Jeremiah Love should never come off the field. I think that's part of it. I think. I don't know what the other part is. Just don't know he wasn't that highly ranked of a recruit. Was for me. It's top 100 recruit for me. And he's showing it. But when you've got a kid that was as productive as he was last season, shouldn't you be like fired up about that? Like, look, Jeremiah Love's best running back college football, but if something happens to him or he's just off the field as part of a normal, he can't always be on the field, isn't it nice to know that you have a guy that's every bit as dynamic and explosive as he is? That should make people feel pretty good about this football team, but instead it turns into, why doesn't Jeremiah Love play more? Because they're trying to play 16 games and they want him to be healthy. And that's what gets frustrating is you get in these things where these weird takes where it's like there's just a portion of the fan base, and it's relatively small, and I don't know if it's coming from other media people or anything like that, where they just want to take the kid and just tear him down instead of saying those 2 dudes are both dudes. yes, that dude's better than that dude, but they're both dudes. And it gets a little frustrating after a while to hear that conversation. But beyond that, Trev, what I do appreciate is the national media. This is one of those times where they actually get it right. We talked about Greg McElroy the other day, did his top 10 running backs list, and he had an honorable mention list. He had both Penn State kids on there, which I understand. They both went for 1,000 yards. Totally fine with it. I'd rather take Jadarian Price than Katron Allen. I get that. But every Penn State fan would say I'd rather have Katron Allen. Fine, whatever. It is what it is. I'm not going to debate that point. He had more production, better production, volume-wise. But he talked about how good Jadarian Price was, and he even said in there, like, look, this kid starts for a lot of people. The national media actually, this is one position where they actually do have the proper respect for a Notre Dame player. It's the Notre Dame fan base, I think, or at least a portion of the Notre Dame fan base that doesn't give this kid his due. But I can assure you that the Notre Dame coaching staff appreciates how good this kid is. And he showed it in the Blue Gold game.
Yeah.
He reminded people with Jeremiah Love out, like, hey, guys, I'm still that guy.
Let me ask you this. Do you think if Notre Dame at quarterback last year, if Riley Leonard wasn't as dedicated of a runner,
if he wasn't as much of a focal point of the run game, okay.
Do you think Jadarian Price would get more love than what he's getting right now?
Probably not. Because we saw this with Logan Diggs and Audric Estime 3 years ago. You know, Logan had over 800 yards, and he was only like 100 yards behind Audric. And there was games where, you know, like Audric got benched against UNLV because he fumbled the ball again. Logan comes in and carries the ball like 28 times for 100 yards, and he got no respect for it. You know, so, yeah.
Unfortunate.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So, let's talk about Jadarian Price now and the impact that he's going to have. So we talked about the lack of respect he gets from some. And somebody in the chats goes, I don't know where you're hearing any of this. So you think I'm just making it up? You think I'm just pulling this out of my you-know-what? I see it on social media all the time. I see it in this chat all the time. I see it on the message board all the time. Just because you don't see it doesn't mean it's not happening. But the reality is that is absolutely happening in the Notre Dame fan base. But let's talk about Jadarian Price, the player now. And let's talk about the impact he could have this year, but also some of the things that he needs to clean up a little bit. What we know about Jadarian Price right now, he is a home run waiting to happen. Home run waiting to happen. Now, that's true for more backs than, you know, that's true for like a lot of backs in this Notre Dame roster, which is kind of wild. Like, they've got a lot of guys that can take this sucker to the house. But he's a legit home run weapon. Not just if you give him a crease, he's going to go. But you look at the run. Andrew Gilmore brought this up earlier in the chat. You look at the run against Purdue. There's a guy coming off the edge unblocked. He makes that guy miss 2 yards behind the line. That had to happen before he could get out in space and then go take off for a big play.
Oh,
and
yeah.
We saw the move he hit against Texas A&M that gave Notre Dame a lead. He goes through on an inside run. There's a linebacker there. He makes the guy miss, bounces it outside, outruns the defense. You think of the 20-plus yard run against Georgia Tech. There's a safety coming down the hill. It's Jadarian versus that safety in the hole, and he just makes the guy miss and goes for the big play. He's a big play waiting to happen. There's two things. And so the very least, I expect Jadarian to have a repeat of last year. Repeat meaning similar numbers, Trevor, on a per carry basis. Maybe he's up to 6'3", 6'4". You know, maybe he gets to 900 to 1,000 yards because he's used more. I expect a minimum repeat of the performance from last season as far as his effectiveness for however often he's used.
Yeah.
What I want to see, however, from Jadarian is I want to see him raise his game a little bit. And here's two areas that I think if Jadarian can improve in these two areas, he's going to really take off, and that's how Notre Dame gets to 2,000-yard backs this season. And the first one is Jadarian does have a tendency to get impatient as a runner. And what I mean by impatient is he's kind of looking to hit the home run, and sometimes he'll kind of make a move that's unnecessary or that's going to end in a -2. You got to trust your blocking. You got to stay within the framework of the play. Sometimes, like the thing about Jadarian is he's used on a lot more counters and different runs that have a higher percentage of losses when you're pulling guys and you're exposing gaps. There's just a tendency that sometimes you're going to have those negatives. And so with Jadarian, that's going to be part of it. But there are times where he is the reason that there was a negative because he, jumped too quickly, bounced it too quickly, cut back too quickly, didn't let the blocking kind of manipulate that. I think part of it was, and I think he got a little better about this as the year went on. Part of it is I think he's looking at I got maybe 4 or 5 carries. I got to do something in these 4 or 5 carries as opposed to, dude, if the best you can do in 5 carries, the best you can do to maximize those yards is 5 carries for 23 yards, then get those 23 yards. And that's okay. And then if there's an opportunity for a bigger play, then you'll make that kind of play. But if you get those 5 carries and they go for 18 yards instead of 23 yards, then you missed 5 yards of opportunities because you didn't stay within the framework of the offense. If he does that, then I think we're going to see a really, really impactful season from him, sort of as that guy coming off the bench to spell Jeremiah Love, but even more so where he might force the hand of the coaches in saying, we got to figure out some ways to use both of them. And what I would love to see happen is for Jadarian to step up his game to where Notre Dame can do more things to get Jeremiah Love out of the box and then let Jadarian be the back in the backfield, which can allow them to get Jeremiah some pass game touches, but then also get Jeremiah on some jet sweep and some screen type touches as well to make him more effective. And then you can still have the running threat of Jadarian Price. But in order to do that, Trev, the other thing he's got to get better at, he's got to get better in pass pro. He has got to step. He is too strong and too good of an athlete and too tough of a kid and well-built to not be better in pass pro. It's a want-to thing, in my opinion, with Jadarian. And that part of his game is going to have to get better to help this team, but then also to help himself when he does go to the NFL draft. If he's not a better pass game threat this year, and it's not so much about the volume of his touches, they'll know, look, this guy can catch the ball and he can do this. But you got to show that you can protect the quarterback, that you can pass block and be effective doing it. If he can improve in those 2 areas, then you're going to see his level of play take an even bigger jump this season, in my opinion, Trev.
It's a must for one of those 2 things, because as high as I am on Jadarian Price, there is still some truth that maybe I don't think this is his ceiling like other people portray it to be, but as of right now, he is kind of like that one-trick pony, like the lightning in the bottle. Now he's elite at it because you don't have the type of production that Jadarian Price had in 2024 without being at that level. But there has to now be growth in year 2 of you being a running back that plays almost starter level snaps. And so it has to be either ideally it's both, but one of pass protection or your patience as a runner has to improve this year for you to take that next step, for Jadarian to take the next step and be who we believe him to be, essentially. And that's how I look at a guy like Jadarian Price, is it has to be one of those 2 things. And as long as it is, this Notre Dame backfield is going to continue to be elite.
There's another player, Trev, and I'll be honest, I think this one is more – we're going to talk about Jordan Faison, wide receiver Jordan Faison. And I think there's layers to where I think Jordan Faison is underappreciated. I think part of it is nationally. We hardly ever hear about Jordan Faison outside of how cool of a story it is that he plays 2 sports. I don't think he's someone that I have seen much from the national media like, hey, they're bringing back Jordan Faison, so they got a weapon here. I don't see a lot of that. And we hear a lot about Jaden Greathouse, understandably so. We hear a lot about Malachi Fields and, in certain areas, which and they should. We don't hear a whole lot about Jordan Faison. And I'll be honest, Trev, this is one of those ones that I think Jordan Faison is somewhat underrated by me. And I don't know that we talk about him as much as maybe we should. I've sat and thought about, I think we probably talked about Will Pauling this spring more than we talked about Jordan Faison. Now, part of that was Jordan Faison wasn't at the last 2 of the only 4 availabilities we got to see. I didn't see him in the Jersey scrimmage. He wasn't there. He was at La Crosse. I saw Will Pauling. We didn't see Jordan Faison in the blue gold game. We saw Will Pauling. But even still, I feel as though I don't talk about him. I'll be honest. I don't talk about him enough and his impact. And you know what reminded me of that is the last couple of days I've been going back just, as I'm working, I'll put a game on. And I put a couple of playoff games and you put the Indiana game on and you're reminded like, dude, he was their best receiver that game. You put the Georgia game on and you're like, his numbers weren't super sexy that game, but he was real impactful in that game. And even like I put the Penn State game on, and third quarter he catches a screen behind the line and he makes two guys miss and he picks up a first down, and I'm thinking like, dude, I don't give that guy enough attention. This is a good football player. There were a couple things about it. Obviously, the injury early in the season hurt him, and I think him being a full-time Z hurt him as well, at least early on, because I don't think they knew how to use him. I mean, if you look through the first 7 games of the season, Jordan Faison only had 29 receiving yards in 7 games because he had 2 for 12 against A&M, didn't play against Northern Illinois, didn't play against Purdue, had no catches against Miami of Ohio, didn't play against Stanford, had no catches against Georgia Tech, and only had 2 catches for 17 yards against Louisville. So in the last, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In the last 9 games, he had 26 catches for 327 yards. That's not exactly lighting the world on fire, but it was clearly a better level of production. But he kind of fell victim to the Jaden Greathouse problem, where you can't produce if you don't get thrown the football. And it was just a byproduct of the offense that they have. So I look at stuff and say, part of that is he was a little bit miscast. He's not a guy that does well tracking the ball down the field as well. There were some times where it's like, dude, you got to make a better play on the ball. But he was also playing a position he hadn't really played before, and he's 5'10". And I don't know he's suited for it. But I just think there's a lot of things that caused him to get a little bit overlooked, to where even I will say I fell victim to this. I fell victim to I don't think we're focusing enough on how important it is that Jordan Faison's coming back in this offense next season and how much that's going to impact a guy like CJ Carr, who has a weapon he can throw the ball behind the line to, and it turns into a first down.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you are. Jordan Faison flew under the radar for me this past season. And after thinking on it, especially after you sent me the list of the players that we were going to talk about today, I think it just comes down to he just didn't do a whole lot of flashy things as a receiver last year. Not saying that he was ineffective, but you think about Notre Dame's receiving core makeup now. You have 6'4", 220-pound Malachi Fields, who was putting up better numbers than any Notre Dame receiver has since 2021 with worse quarterback play. You think about Jaden Greathouse and what he did against Penn State and what he did against Ohio State. Jordan Faison, when he's healthy, has kind of been like he just does his job. That catch that he had against IU in the playoff game, it wasn't anything flashy. It didn't make the cornerback sit down. He didn't have a mossing one-handed type of grab, but he did his job, made a great catch, tracked the ball well. I mean, his flashiest plays last year were on special teams, one of which didn't count, unfortunately, in the Virginia game on that awesome fake punt. The other one was on a reverse kickoff return to open up the second half against Indiana. And so with Jordan Faison, unfortunately, that's just kind of where he fell to me. And I'm not saying that that's correct, but per the parameters of this show, he is absolutely somebody that's flown under the radar. And I would, the way that I look at it is I underappreciated him. Because when I see him on the field, I'm like, hey, Jordan Faison's out there. He's good to go. He can make a play whenever the ball touches his hand. So I wouldn't say that I underrate him. I think he's underappreciated because he's not one of the first names that come to my mind, and that's on me.
Yeah, same. And I think that's you could use it kind of 2 different ways. You could use it in an underrated and underappreciated way. I think he's underrated nationally. I think he's underappreciated by some. I actually think this is one that the fan base has a greater appreciation of him than I do. So whereas I think the fan base, there's a chunk of the fan base that doesn't respect how good Jadarian Price is, I think the fan base actually at times has kind of overrated Jordan Faison in a way that's, I wonder if it caused me to push back on it. You know, there are people that are like, he's better than Jaden Greathouse. I'm like, guys. And then I think my reaction to that was almost to kind of push back on that to a degree in which I then went beyond where I should have in my thought process, where I didn't give him enough respect for what he did. I kind of punished him for how others talk about him. I'll be honest. I think that's why I don't talk enough about Jordan Faison.
Oh,
and why I don't appreciate what, like, he's found his sweet spot now. And within an offense where you're going to see the ball thrown more, I think he can find that really, really good spot. I don't think he's not a number one. That was my pushback. I don't even know that he's a number two, but he can be a really important piece to a championship caliber offense. That is where his sweet spot is. And I don't think there's enough people talking about that.
The entire scenario that you just laid out is exactly how I felt about Chris Fink when he was here. Legit, like that's what I fell victim to with him. Like, I underappreciated what Chris Fink meant to that Notre Dame offense in the time that he was there, because there were a lot of people like, oh, dude, like Notre Dame's got Chris Fink. And I was like, some walk-on guy that for whatever reasons returning punts, and he's slowly becoming a focal point of the offense. That was my bad. And I'm starting to do a little bit of the same with Jordan Faison. Not to the same degree, but I agree. I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm with you.
So we're going to hammer the fans when we think they're underrating a player. We're going to hammer the media when we think they're underrating a player. And we're going to call ourselves out when we think we're underrating a player or underappreciating a player. And that's where I think Jordan Faison falls into.
Yeah.
The third player we're going to talk about on offense, Trevor, is the most interesting of this group, because it's a player that I don't think is going to start for Notre Dame this season. I don't know that he's going to play a whole lot this season. And there's certain aspects of the fan base that will talk about him. But I think this is more of a national thing. The minute Steve Angeli transferred, the entire conversation nationally went right to CJ Carr. And I think to a degree, rightfully so, because I think CJ Carr is going to win the starting quarterback job. But I don't think there's enough conversation and enough appreciation for how important of a role Kenny Minchey is going to play on this football team. And there's several aspects to this. Number one is, if something happens to CJ, if CJ wins the job and let's say he gets injured or doesn't perform well, whatever the case may be, you're going to want to make sure that you have a guy that can come in and play at a very high level. And Kenny Minchey can do that. The other aspect to how important Kenny Minchey is because CJ is a young player. I don't care how smart you are or how mature you are. The reality is, a mature player that's being pushed is going to be better than a mature player who's not being pushed by somebody else. And the presence of Kenny Minchey is going to force CJ Carr. And Marcus Freeman talked about this in his end of spring press conference. He talked about how for these quarterbacks, every day is a high pressure day because they know I got to bring it today. CJ Carr's going to have to, he's not out there like, well, I got the job. You know, I'm the man. I'm going to be a starting quarterback this year. And then, you know, everybody else. Sorry, my mic.
The old microphone.
Barely. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's coming through your computer, I think.
Yeah, I know. Barely touched the cord, and it does what it does, but that's just the nature of it. But the point is, CJ Carr every day is going to have to know, I got to bring it today because I know Kenny's going to bring it today. So even if CJ wins the job, the presence of Kenny Minchey is going to make him better, which then in turn makes the team better. And those are two reasons where I think he can be a little bit underrated and underappreciated, especially if CJ Carr is announced the starter. We're going to look back and be like, Kenny's presence is going to still have a big impact on this football team, even if he's not thrust into situations the way that Steve Angeli was.
I'm so glad when you texted me about wanting to talk about Kenny Minchey in this segment, because I absolutely have fallen victim to underappreciating him, underrating him. And a lot of it is just his entire, I guess, path so far at Notre Dame is kind of what I've fallen back onto. You know, CJ Carr was committed before Kenny Minchey, and he comes in and he's kind of kind of the vibes guy in the room. Gino Guidugli came out and said, this is CJ's role in the room. This is Steve's role in the room. This is Riley's role in the room. Kenny's the guy that's going to come in and get the music going and get the good vibes going. And that was just kind of always my thought of him. And going through this quarterback battle, I did think that it was going to be between CJ and Kenny. I thought Steve was going to kind of play third fiddle in that role, which kind of played out this spring. But now, over the last couple months, in my mind, and I'm not saying that this is correct, and I'm glad that we're talking about it in this segment, is it was always like, yeah, this is kind of CJ's job, but if Kenny just plays out of his mind this summer and goes nuts, and then Notre Dame's in a good spot because that means Kenny played well enough to dethrone CJ. Some of that, it's a little truth to that, but the gap isn't as far as what I've perceived it to be. And I think a lot of Notre Dame fans have fallen into that because I don't think Kenny Minchey is miles down the road from CJ Carr and has to go play like Joe Burrow to be in this conversation to battle out CJ. And that was the issue that I ran into when I think about Kenny.
I don't think it's going to be overly close when it's all said and done. But even then, I still feel that Kenny Minchey's presence is part of that reason. Because Kenny's presence is going to force CJ Carr to say, okay, if you want this job, then you've got to play at a certain level because Kenny can do this. Kenny can do that. And that's where I think it's going to matter. But if for some reason CJ Carr gets hurt, doesn't play well, having a guy like Kenny Minchey coming off the bench is huge. The other part of it too is, Trev, you and I talked about this a couple weeks ago. Part of the reason that I'm so excited about the quarterback position is because A, I think CJ Carr is going to be a stud. I do. I think he's going to be a special player. And B, if he's not the starter and it's not injury related, it means Kenny played better than him, which means how good does he have to be to outplay CJ Carr?
Yeah.
And that's what gets me really fired up is this is a quarterback room that's very talented. And this is another position where I feel like for some, there's not enough bandwidth to talk about two guys. You've got some that just basically have ignored like Kenny, and it was all about Steve. And then others, it's CJ. But then you have other people that are in the why not Kenny Minchey thing. Like what does this even mean? Like, okay, so who's saying Kenny? Like, is he terrible? Like, no, it's don't do with Kenny what you're annoyed by people doing with CJ or Steve. It's sort of talking about both of them. Both of them need to be in this conversation. And the presence of Kenny Minchey ensures, in my opinion, that you're going to have a starting quarterback this year that is a really good football player, because you have to be to beat out the other one. And if it was just one of them, I don't know if you'd have that same sort of push with two younger players. And that's where I think CJ Carr and Kenny Minchey are going to make each other better. But if you're someone that believes CJ is ultimately going to win the battle, which I do, then you greatly appreciate how Kenny's presence is going to make him better, but also gives you certainty that if something does happen, you're putting a pretty good football player on the field. And it kind of goes back to what we talked about with the running backs. How many teams can say you can lose your starting running back and be like, you're going to be okay. You're going to be all right. As long as the line does its job, you're going to be okay because you've got this guy, and this guy. And I feel kind of the same way at quarterback. Kenny staying gives Notre Dame a bigger margin for error at the quarterback position. To right now have greater certainty that unless the worst thing happens, meaning two injuries, you're going to be fine at quarterback.
Where some of the underappreciation lies for me with Kenny Minchey as well is his ability or his decision to forego the spring portal. I'm sure that the conversations that were happening internally in the Notre Dame quarterback room were a lot different than what the national narrative was. But to that point, a lot of schools after Steve's decision to enter the portal, it was, all right, CJ Carr era in South Bend. It's always, CJ Carr will seemingly take over, talking about going back to the first segment of the show and all these, preseason top 25 rankings and post-spring and all this other stuff. CJ Carr is always mentioned. as the presumed starter. And Kenny Minchey didn't fall victim to that. He was like, no, I mean, I will have a role on this team, whether it's at number 1 or a rotational piece or number 2, I'm still going to come in and battle. And that's a lot of respect, especially in this day and age of the transfer portal, man. Kenny Minchey easily could have went somewhere else and been like, hey, I'm just going to be your guy. And he's still here.
Trevor, there's several other guys we could have talked about on offense. I think those are the main 3. We'll talk a little bit about, Malachi Fields here in a little bit. And some of these guys are underrated by some, but not others, or underappreciated by others. Some guys we're going to talk about later. I think there's a little bit of Ashton Craig kind of being a forgotten man, but there's another show we're going to talk about a little bit more with him. There's a few other guys we could look at and be like, hey, this guy's underrated, but they're going to fall in other topics. I think these are the main ones, especially the first 2. I think Price and Faison are especially important because they need to play. If they both play their game this year and can stay healthy, they add so much to this offense. So much to this offense, especially Faison. Like, they need him to be healthy in 2025. Like, they need to get the version of Jordan Faison we saw the last couple games of 2023, and then of course that we saw in the first 2 playoff games. I mean, if it's kind of like we said about Jaden Greathouse, if we get that version of Jaden Greathouse more consistently, not just the high yards, but just the type of play, the production, the making plays after the catch, things like that, he's going to be a pretty good football player. I mean, you look at Jordan Faison, and he had 4 catches for 52 yards against Navy, and then 7 for 89 against Indiana, 4 for 46 against Georgia. Like, that's kind of production I can live with. Even in Army, 2 catches for 46 yards. I can live with that. There's going to be some games he only catches the ball 2 times, but against Penn State, he only caught it 2 times, but he went for 25 yards, including a ball where he caught the ball behind the line of scrimmage, as I talked about earlier, made some guys miss and picks up a first down. That's the kind of production that we need to see on a consistent basis, minimum, from Jordan Faison, and then he'll have his 7-8 catch games for over 100 yards when he's not being looked at as much, or when people are benefiting, or focusing on other players, and he'll benefit from that. So that's what I get down to when we talk about. He's one of those guys. Jadarian Price is one of those guys. When we talked about the star power show, we said you need these couple guys to really step up and be stars, but there's a lot of other guys that will occasionally will play like stars in certain moments, and these are 2 examples of that. There will be games this year where we're going to look at Jadarian Price and be like, that is a dude, an absolute dude. And whether it's a game like USC where Jeremiah Love gets hurt, who was playing great in the first half, he had 99 yards through his first carry of the second half. He gets hurt. Jadarian steps in the game. I think he had like 2 carries for like -1 yard at that point in time. He ends with over 100 and a half of football. You look at a guy like Jordan Faison, who against Indiana, and it wasn't just the big play down the field, but he was clutch, making grabs over the middle. Now, Jordan also, we talked about Jadarian needs to improve. Jordan's got to do a better job of catching the football. Him and Bo Collins last year were frustrating at times in their lack of consistency catching the football on plays where you're like, dude, that one you have to catch. Like, there's no excuse not to catch that one. That was a gimme. You can't make those kind of drops. He had a little bit of that. I mean, he had everybody talks about Bo Collins having 7 drops last year. Jordan had 6, and he was targeted 23 fewer times than Bo Collins was. That's an area where he's going to have to improve. Is those dude, you're better than that. And if he can clean that up, then all of a sudden you've got a guy that there will be 2 or 3, 4 games this year. Like, that's a dude right there. We need to get him the ball more. You don't, because you don't forget this guy, and this guy. But sometimes, Jaden's not feeling it, or their defense is focused on him, or Malachi's not feeling it, or the defense is focused on him, or the scheme that the team is playing is going to lead the quarterback to that position more. When that happens, Jordan Faison, Will Paul, and guys like that really got to step up and be really good football players. We could have talked about Faison in the breakout category as well. He could have fit in that one as well. But I really thought it was appropriate to talk about him in this part of the conversation. Anybody else on offense that you really want to discuss before we move on to the defensive conversation?
Nobody really. Defensively, it's just a more interesting conversation because organically they rotate more than what the offense does. And so we were texting before the show. I think there's some degree where Emil Wagner could be in that conversation. There's a lot of talk along the offensive line, and I think sometimes he can fall to the wayside, even though that he was the only offensive lineman that started all 16 games for Notre Dame last year. But, then there's also some national people have him as a top 10 returning offensive tackle in college football. And so it's a little bit foggy as to where he falls. I'm sure we'll continue to talk about him as the offseason goes along. But the three that we talked about, especially the first two, were the definite ones for me. Well, all right, folks, we are getting ready to transition over to the defensive side of this conversation. But before we get there, you guys know what to do. Please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, you see it scrolling down there at the bottom of the screen, is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, we are going to shift gears here. Same conversation, different side of the ball. And we are going to continue talking about the underrated and the underappreciated members of this Notre Dame football team. And defensively, it's a little bit different of a conversation. Like we talked about in part one, it's, they rotate a little bit differently. So naturally, there's going to be more players that get overlooked. But there's a handful of players that we're going to talk about on defense, and there's some at every level of the defense. So I think a good place to start here would be along the defensive line. But overarching defensively, as good as Notre Dame has been on defense the last couple of years, hard to believe that there are still some players that are going underappreciated and underrated.
It is. I think you touched on part of it is because they do play so many guys and they do split the reps the way that they do, that there's just not the production from certain players. You're just not going to see the high tackle for loss numbers from certain guys, and you're just not going to see, this guy had X number of tackles and tackles for loss and sacks and things like that. And also the way that certain positions, they don't put you in position to make a lot of plays. They put you in position to do your job at a high level that's going to then open up opportunities for somebody else to make plays. There's some guys in this defense we're not going to talk about. And we're not going to talk about Drake Bowen because we've already talked about him in other shows. But he's a guy that I think there's a portion of the fan base that absolutely doesn't respect Drake Bowen and appreciate how good he is. There's other players that, we could talk about. We talked about a Don Schuler the other day as a potential star player. We could easily talk about him in this category, someone the national media is paying almost no attention to, that we think they should be paying a lot more attention to. So there's certainly guys like that. But the when you look up front, one guy that I think absolutely gets underrated and underappreciated for just how important he was to the team last year is Josh Burnham. And when you look at Josh last season, the numbers aren't going to blow you away. He's not a guy that had 10 tackles for loss and 5 sacks, and he didn't have that really key sack like against the Georgia game. And if I were to tell people okay, who finished number 1 on the defense in tackles for loss, I think most people would be like Riley Mills, and you'd be correct. Okay, who was tied for number 2? How many people are going to guess on last year's defense that Josh Burnham and Jaden Ausberry tied for number 2 in tackles for loss last season? And keep in mind that Josh Burnham played 2 fewer games than Jaden Ausberry did because he missed 2 games early in the season, and he also switched positions when he came back from his first injury. He got hurt against Northern Illinois. He's playing very good football early in the season, got hurt against Northern Illinois, missed half that game despite having 4 tackles in that game, missed the next 2 games, came back against Louisville and played, but didn't necessarily. I mean, you could tell he was kind of working himself back, and he was getting used to. They had moved him back to Viper, so he played Viper in 2023, and then last offseason, Notre Dame moved him back to strong side end, to the defensive end position. Then when you had the injuries to Patelho and Boubacar, they moved Burnham back to Viper. So he misses 2 games and then comes back against Louisville, only plays 4 plays. Then he starts getting more involved in the Stanford game. And what does he do in the Stanford game? He has 2 pressures in the game. He has a hit on the quarterback in the game. And then he also has that play where they tried to run an option on him. He gets his long arms out because he's a very athletic, very long, twitchy player. breaks up the pitch, recovers it, sets up a Notre Dame touchdown. There were so many times last year where you'd kind of not see Josh Burnham or not hear from Josh Burnham. All of a sudden, big moment, boom, big play. Had a big play early against Indiana, had a big play early against Georgia. I've talked before about that big play against Penn State where, they're getting ready to go up with, for a touchdown. I think it was 7-0 at the time. Let me pull up the box score. I just was watching that game last night, but I missed kind of that part. I fast forward to that part where, where I went to where they got down 10-0 and I started watching from there because I didn't want to watch them fall behind 10-0.
Yeah, I don't blame you.
But it was I think it was the drive where they were. I think it was their first field goal drive, where it was 0-0, and they were going for a score, and it was 2nd and goal from the 1. I'm going to find this play. It's 2nd and goal from the 1 yard line. They're about to punch it in for a touchdown. They give the ball to Katron Allen. Josh Burnham comes from behind, tackles him for a 2-yard loss. They go for it on 3rd down and don't get it. There's I think that was the one where you had the drop pass by Nicholas Singleton. They settle for a field goal. Now all of a sudden, Notre Dame gets a field goal late in the half. They're down 10-3. First drive of the second half. You go down and score, make it 10-10, brand new ball game. Well, what if they're behind 14-3 or 14-0 at that point in time? That ended up being a huge play that not a lot of people talked about because it got overshadowed by some freak plays by Jeremiah Love and Jaden Greathouse and, this Christian Gray and other guys. And people just kind of forgot how important and how huge that play was. And Josh Burnham just seemed to kind of do those all the time. And he was also, if you go back and watch the game against Ohio State, he was one of the best players they had on defense against Ohio State. He was one of the few guys on the defensive line that I thought played pretty good football in that game. And he doesn't get talked about a lot. And I don't think Josh even understands how good he is, or how good he could be, I should say. Josh Burnham is one of those guys that doesn't get a lot of attention for what he is, but he's also a guy that I look at and say, Trev, if Josh can take his game to another level, then this defense becomes scary good. Because if he can play to the level I think he's capable of with Bryce Young at that position, then all of a sudden your end position is as good as it's been since 2018 or 2019 when you had Khalid Kareem and Adetokunbo Ogundeji playing that position, which were 2 NFL draft picks. And Khalid, I think, would have got drafted way higher if not for the shoulder injury, which basically kept him from ever being much of an NFL player. But if he doesn't have that shoulder injury, I think Khalid Kareem is maybe even a 2nd, 3rd round draft pick. I think he was a really good player. But that was a dynamic 1-2 punch in 18 and 19. I think Bryce Young and Josh Burnham can be that. Josh has to understand how good he is and play to that level. But even if he just repeats what he did last year, that's a good football player. And the kind of guy you need to be that dirty work type of player that doesn't get the love, and honestly, to a degree, shouldn't get the love of other players who are just more impactful, but is a guy that you're so glad you have when he does step up in those big moments and make those big plays.
Yeah, for a kid like Josh Burnham, it's about his journey to becoming a complete defensive end. In some lights yesterday, we talked about Boubacar Traore and his ability to become a complete end, not just as a pass rusher, but in the same light, if he is just a really good pass rusher, it's a breakout season for him. Josh Burnham is already really stout against the run, arguably one of their best defensive linemen against the run. But his journey to becoming a complete defensive end, I think for that reason, because his job right now isn't super glamorous, it's not super sexy, that's why I think he flies under the radar for a lot of people. That, and the player that he's sharing a position with is 6'7", 265 pounds, and is the son of a Hall of Famer. And so
whose dad was an All-American at Notre Dame, NFL Hall of Famer. Yes.
Right.
And Bryce earns that. I mean, deserves that attention. But when you have a guy like that, it's going to somewhat overshadow the other guys in the position. Yes.
And not to take away from anything of Burnham's ability and his skill set. He's a very athletic player. He has the size. He has the skill set. He has the tools to be really good at this position. Really impactful player. But I think for a kid like Josh Burnham, it's about becoming the complete end. And I think that's going to be his journey in 2025.
Josh also is an interesting guy because his best football was the last third of the season, last quarter of the season. If you look at his production last season, he was a guy that in the first, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games he played in, he had 5 missed tackles in 9 games. It's not good. He had 0 in the last 5 games. In the first 9 games that he played in, he had 6 quarterback hurries. He had no sacks and 3 hits on the quarterback. This is looking at Pro Football Focus numbers. And he had, 9 total run stops in 9 games. So 6 pressures and 9 stops in 9 games. That's very mediocre production. Last 5 games of the year, when it mattered most against USC and in the 4 playoff games, in the last 5 games, Josh had 7 pressures, including 2 sacks, and he had 10 run stops in the last 5 games. So if you can kind of have that level of production throughout the season and hopefully up the pass rushing a little bit, that's where Josh Burnham becomes a difference maker, and even more of a consistent difference maker. He had several difference-making plays last year, but it's about, can you do it more consistently? And that's going to be the key for Josh. And so I always, Trev, you know this, I've always appreciated guys who play well in the biggest moments. And if you really want to start looking at his numbers even more so and look at the last 6 games, including Army, he had 13 run stops in the last 6 games that he played in. And you could throw Army in there because that was a top 25 game. That's a big moment. And that level of production, you're saying that's where Josh Burnham can make his money, is a really good, disruptive player off the edge against the run that hopefully can add more of a pass rushing repertoire. And that's going to be something Al Washington's going to have to take a look at this offseason, is like, this is a former quarterback middle linebacker that's never rushed the passer before he came here. You can't just assume he's got this pass rushing repertoire. You got to kind of teach it to him. And that's something that Josh is going to have to really work on this offseason, because he's a good football player, and he's a guy that can really help your football team if he's able to go out this year and just raise his level of play at all. But even if he just repeats last year, he's a very important, underrated part. And he's a try-hard guy, but he's a very long, athletic try-hard guy. So former top 100 recruit. And I'm just waiting, but it wasn't at the position he's currently playing. So I'm hoping he's one of those guys that can kind of have that next jump. And he's someone that I thought about talking about during the breakout session as well, but I thought this would be a more fitting category for him.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that the same. We definitely see that the same. Next guy on the list that we're going to talk about here, Brian, we're moving up, I guess technically back to the linebacker position. And there's been a lot of talk about this linebacker room so far this offseason. We believe that they have the potential to be one of, if not the best room in the country. And Drake Bowen's evolution as a starter, and Kingston is going to be a star, and all the weight that Jalen Snead put on, but he's still fast and athletic. But there's one guy that kind of falls to the wayside in the linebacker conversation. That's Jaden Ausberry. Mm-hmm. And he came in the same class that Drake Bowen did. And really, for the duration of his career, I don't want to say lived in the shadow of Bowen, but Bowen definitely attracts a little bit more of the attention, some of it rightfully so. But after last season, Jaden Ausberry finished, 5th on the team in total tackles and started 1 game? Mm-hmm. What he showed me last year is, 1, he's a lot more rangy than I thought that he was when he came in. Didn't know that he had speed like that. And then 2, he showed me that he was the team's best open field tackler.
Oh, yeah.
That was something that I was not aware that he possessed when he came in. So Jaden Ausberry is the next player on this list.
Well, earlier I had him ranked very high coming out of high school. So I can't say that I'm necessarily surprised by it, but I worry about, since he doesn't have like the physical attributes that some other guys bring to the table, is there a chance that he could get kind of overlooked or passed up, because as good as he is, he's not as big as Drake. He's not as just natural as big as Kingston and things like that. And maybe not quite as twitchy as what Jalen Snead is. Does he kind of get passed up? But, Cajun Irish said it is, he's a football player, and that's absolutely right. But he's also a good athlete. I think that also often gets overlooked. The issue with Jaden Ausberry, he just doesn't have great size. But as you mentioned last year, Trev, he was 5th on the team in tackles, and also total tackles, and also solo tackles last season. But if you look at the total number of snaps he played, he ranked 11th on the team in snaps. and he was one tackle and one total tackle and one solo tackle behind a Don Schuler last year for the number 4 spot. They had the same number of assisted tackles. Well, if you look at the total number of snaps last year, Don Schuler played 768. Jaden Ausberry played 438. That's a lot. That's 330 fewer snaps last year. Think about that level of production that he had. If you look at Jaden Ausberry's production last season and you say, okay, well, what if he would have played the same number of snaps as, like Jack Kaiser? Okay, well, what kind of production would he had? So he had 58 tackles last season on 400 and what did I say, Trev? 438
438
snaps. Okay, well, what if he had the same number of tackles as Jack Kaiser, 641? That gets him at 85 tackles. Well, that's really close to where Jack was last year. As far as total tackles, Jack led the team at 90. He had 35 solo tackles last year on 438 snaps. If you give him the same number of snaps that Jack Kaiser had last season, that would have given him a grand total of 51 solo tackles last season. Jack Kaiser was 55. So as a redshirt freshman, he was just behind the pace that Jack Kaiser, a 4th-round draft pick, team captain was as a 6th-year senior on the season. It gives you some idea. Again, when you're taking off your starters, you're putting in backups or rotation guys. I don't even want to call them backups, rotation guys who are just as productive as your starters. That is huge, huge when you talk about how impactful it is. But here's the other part of it. Yeah, the tackles part is great, but he had 6.5 tackles for loss last year. Jack Kaiser only had 5. So if you take his tackle for loss production and divide it by the number of snaps he had, and let's say give him the same number of snaps Jack Kaiser had, now you're talking about a guy with 9.5 tackles for loss. So his per snap production was outstanding this past season. And when you're going to have a guy coming off the bench, that's exactly what you want. Hey, you're not going to play as much. But when you're in there, you need to make some plays. You need to do your job. Now, in the postseason, I thought Jaden struggled a little bit against some of the bigger players. You saw him have a hard time tackling Tyler Warren. A lot of people had that problem. But that's where his lack of size can kind of hurt him a little bit. He's not a super long guy. But as you mentioned, Trev, when he gets in space, when he's able to attack downhill, you think of some of the game-changing plays he made. We talked about the Georgia Tech game. I think Notre Dame was up. What was it? What was the score of the game at that time? Give me a second. I'm going to look up the Notre Dame Georgia Tech box score here real quick. But there was a moment in the game. I'm trying to remember what the score was, but it was basically where if I think it was 14-7, maybe 21-7, where Georgia, let me find that missed field goal drive for Georgia Tech. It was third quarter. It was 21-7, and they're driving. And they're heading down the field, and they run a play. They're in the red zone. They run a reverse, I believe is what it was, and they get out in space, and it's the receiver against Jaden Ausberry. And Jaden makes a stop, forces them to kick a field goal. They end up missing the field goal. That was a big moment in the game. And then you think of the play against Louisville where Leonard Moore strips the ball. Well, if Jaden Ausberry is not hustling down the field, he's not in position to pick up that fumble in what was a game-changing part of that game. So he had a lot of those type of plays last season. And now it's about, okay, now you're going into year 2, and everybody's talking about Kingston and Jalen Sneed and Madden Faramo. And it's like, y'all are forgetting about number 4, who was a really good football player last year. And I'm curious to see what kind of production that Jaden can give them in year 2. Because when you're 11th on the team in snaps, but you finish 5th in tackles and 2nd in tackles for loss, that's pretty good production. And to give context to the first guy that we talked about, Josh Burnham finished tied for 2nd on the team in tackles for loss. He was 10th in total snaps last year. So the guys that finished 10th and 11th last year in snaps played finished tied for 2nd in tackles for loss. That tells me those guys are good football players. And that's what makes Notre Dame's defense so good, but it's also why it's understandable why certain individuals aren't getting the love that they should be getting. I have no problem with the national media overlooking Jaden Ausberry and Josh Burnham, or Notre Dame fans overlooking them, because it's hard to, like, we have like, why can't you love both Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love. Well, this is like, well, why can't you love? And you start listing off like 28 players that play on a regular basis. Like, well, I only got so much love to give, man. You know what I mean? Like, what do you want from me? These are more understandable, but these are the type of players that make this defense so good, because you can't just play guys every single play like you used to. Games are just more, they're more violent, they're faster, they play at a much greater pace. You've got to play way more games now than you used to. Last time Notre Dame won a title, they played 12 games, including the championship game. Now you got to play 16 if you're Notre Dame to win a title. You have to be able to have depth. And what makes Notre Dame so good is that they have a rotation where guys like Josh Burnham and Jaden Ausberry aren't considered your dudes, but they produce like it when they're on the field. And that's what makes this team so good. So these are understandable guys being overlooked. They're underappreciated on this team, but they're very, very important. Very important players.
Absolutely. The next step in Jaden Ausberry's kind of journey as a Notre Dame linebacker, and you touched on it already, it was just kind of performance in the postseason. I mean, he was a fantastic player in the regular season, and he wasn't bad by any means in the postseason. He did struggle against Penn State. A lot of Notre Dame defenders, especially in the first half, struggled against Penn State, so he's not alone in that category. But I go back and I think about how well the defense played against Georgia, and Jaden Ausberry logged 0 tackles against Georgia on 33 snaps. So there was a dip in the production come postseason. So that is the next step in his evolutions to where, maybe in the spring of 2026, we're not having some of these conversations around, hey, Jaden Ausberry is still underrated, because I do think that he will start to produce at a higher level in those big moments. He performed in the big moments in the regular season. He had a good game against Texas A&M. This is his first real meaningful minutes in a game. He comes in and he has 4 total tackles against Texas A&M. He brought up what he did against Louisville. He had a pretty decent game against USC, but the postseason started to waver a little bit. And so there's going to be some things that he'll have to work on over the course of the season. But Jaden Ausberry is in a position where he's in a very loaded room and he does get overlooked because of some of the names in there. But man, he's in a position where if he can just continue on this track, he's still going to be a really, really good football player for Notre Dame's defense. Next guy on this list, continuing to move back levels on this defense, we are going to talk about the safety position. More specifically, we're going to talk about Luke Talich. And the safety position has been a hot topic of conversation this offseason for a multitude of different reasons. A lot of young talent. Who replaces Xavier Watts? Jalen Stroman transfers in. He was an all-ACC caliber player. But in the shuffle and in the mix, and thankfully he had the blue gold game that he did, but Luke Talich tends to get lost in the mix a little bit. He was brought in as a walk-on. People kind of just reference his height. He's a 6'4" guy. But then who else comes in behind him? It's Jadon Blair, who's an inch taller and a higher-rated recruit. And so Luke Talich has kind of fallen to the wayside, but he's a really, really good football player.
He is. I mean, he's one of your best cover guys that you have on special teams. And I kind of laugh when people look at the interception he had where he kind of got twisted around and never quite got back on track. Like, see, he's just not that fast. I'm like, yeah, go watch him run down the field against Penn State. Go watch that punt where he just lays the punt returner out. And watch him flying down the field and tell me that kid can't run. Look, I don't know what role Luke Talich is going to have this year. I don't know if he's going to be a starter, if he's going to be a number 2. Is he your next in line safety at either position? Is he your next in line behind the next in line safety? Is he going to be a 4? Is he going to be a 5? I don't know what his role is going to be this year, but he is a very important part of this football team in whatever role he's going to have. And I think he showed in the spring game. Look, you can't overhype spring games. I understand. But you saw in that game when he got a lot of reps, he was very productive, very active, coming downhill, filling the holes and being impactful at the line of scrimmage and showing range on the back end. Like this guy's going to probably play for you this year. There's a chance, however, that when Jalen Stroman comes back and Jadon Blair keeps improving and Bronte keeps, maybe he doesn't play a lot there. And if he doesn't, then he's going to be a major special teams weapon. But a guy like Luke Talich to me is very important because, number one, if he does play, he's a good football player. And he gives you some protection against your young guys not being ready, your really talented young players not being ready. to where if they're not ready to play yet, like you've got to, when you've talked about young players playing, you got to have a bar, and the bar's got to be this player. And if you're going to play, you got to be better than that guy. And the higher that bar, the better your team is going to be. Because if the bar's pretty low, like you just got to beat out that guy, and it's like, okay, you just got to beat out Low Wood, or you just got to beat out, I don't know how high that, you just got to beat out Clarence Lewis. Like, I don't know how high the bar is. Like, is Benjamin Morrison a better prospect than Dallas Golden? I don't know. I mean, I had Dallas slightly ahead of Benjamin, but I'm far more confident that Benjamin was going to play as a freshman than Dallas, because when Benjamin came, it was like, you got to beat out Clarence Lewis. Great kid, try-hard guy, but just not super talented. Whereas now Dallas has got to come in, and Mark Zachary's got to come in, and you've got to beat out Christian Gray and Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs and Devontae Smith if you're going to play. So you want that bar as high as possible. And I think Luke Talich's spring raised the bar of what has to happen for Jalen Stroman to become a starter at Notre Dame. And then for the younger players, Bronte Johnson and Jadon Blair, to get on the field. That's huge for a team. And that's very underrated and underappreciated, to when a guy comes in and says, here's the bar. If you want to play, you got to be better than me, and I'm here, as opposed to here. And when a guy can be there, and that's what Luke was this spring, that says, okay, if he's starting, you're going to have a solid football player there. At the very least, you're going to have a solid football player there. If he's not starting, it's because somebody even better beat him out, and now you're going to be really good at that position. And that's the importance of a guy like Luke Talich in this defense, is he has raised the bar for what that position needs to be to start opposite of Don Schuler. Now, that's the bar that Jalen Stroman and Jadon Blair and Bronte Johnson need to live up to. And if they don't, then Luke Talich is a good football player for you. If they do, then he's an important piece of your rotation, but he's helped raise the level of play.
Couldn't agree more. Definitely raised the floor of where the room is. When I looked at a guy like Luke Talich, he came into the safety rotation as like at the start of spring, it was always the conversation of, hey, don't forget about Luke Talich. And now it's, hey, he's in the mix for this thing. Not even to me, he's solidified his spot in the rotation. Now it's like, dude, he could start in the fall. Yeah. In no way would it surprise me if, when Notre Dame trots out there on August 31st, number 28's lining up at safety next to a Don Schuler. But in February, that would have been a surprise to me. But after seeing him and his growth over the spring, definitely would not surprise me in the slightest. Definitely not in the slightest. Any more thoughts on Luke Talich before we move on to our last guy, Brian?
Are you referring to the story I told about how I was talking to someone at Notre Dame and I was mentioning a bunch of players and I forgot Luke, and he was like, don't forget Luke Talich? I mean, that literally happened to me this spring, like right before the spring, or maybe it was like during spring. I can't remember when it was, but I was having a conversation with somebody inside the program and I was mentioning, hey, how do you feel about this, and this? And they're like, you're forgetting Luke Talich. Like, I was like, my bad. And I'm like, I love Luke, so I was mad at myself for forgetting him. But I mean, that's when you know something. It's one thing when you ask a coach or ask somebody inside the program about a guy and you get feedback. You're like, okay, that's good. I like it when somebody else brings the guy up. I don't have to bring him up. Then that guy's making a difference.
Yeah,
because other people are bringing him up to you without you even have to ask, and that's certainly what happened.
Yeah,
with Luke. I think this last guy, Trevor, is going to be one of the more interesting ones that we talk about, because we could talk about him in almost every category that we're going to discuss outside of the sophomore breakdown class. And that is Christian Gray, who we talked about including in the Star Power show, because he's got the talent to be a star. We talked about him in the breakout portion of the show. You also, by the way, brought up Luke Talich as a potential breakout player in our conversations as well. And we settled on this one because I think this is an appropriate one for Christian Gray. Is underappreciated and underrated from a national standpoint and also by the fan base. And he's one of those guys that's fallen victim to what I call the Troy Pride syndrome. where a guy can play really good football, but all that people tend to focus on are the bad plays. And there were some for Christian last year. And it wasn't just the USC game and the last play against Ohio State. I think of a really bad pass interference call he had against Navy, where you're like, dude, what are you doing? Like, you're better than that guy. Why are you grabbing a Navy wide receiver? But there's also were times this year where he was outstanding for not a game or a series or a game, but for stretches of the season. And it's funny that a fan base that is now kind of hard on him a month into the season was basically saying, I think he's their best corner. After 4 games, I think he might be their best corner. He wasn't. That was still Benjamin Morrison, but he was playing in a way where you at least had to – you couldn't call someone crazy for suggesting that it wasn't Benjamin Morrison. That's how well Christian was playing. I think he's gone from a guy that maybe there was a lot of expectations for to now a guy that I think is a little bit underrated nationally and within the fan base, because the focus is on the down moments and not enough on, okay, he's got to get better in those areas. But like USC game, oh yeah, I mean, he had the pick 6, but let's not forget the 4th and 2 stop he had on the first drive of the game. Let's not forget the play he made against Penn State on Penn State's first drive of the second half. Notre Dame ties it up 10-10, first drive of the third quarter. Penn State gets the ball back. They run a stretch. Who's the DB that flew downhill and blew up that run? It's Christian Gray. So I think he doesn't get enough credit for how good he was, but we can also say, dude, you've got to be better than you were in those moments. You've got to trust yourself. You got to trust your technique. You got to be more of a student of the game. You can be a star. You got to clean up that stuff. We can say that without then trying to just poo-poo his performance and act like all he was what we saw against Navy. I mean, what we saw against USC, and then that one play against Georgia and that one play against Ohio State. He's got to clean that stuff up. But for a lot of those games outside of that, he was a pretty good football player.
Yeah, a lot of Christian Gray's performance last season was kind of, I think it somewhat dictates how a lot of fans view him, because the good from Christian Gray was so good. Truly, the big highlight reel plays, that 4th and 2 stop against Texas A&M, the 4th and 2 stop against USC, like all of those were really big highlight plays, but then the downs were really down. To your point about how polarizing some of these players can be, people either separate themselves into 2 camps, like we've talked about so often on the show, and can't live in the gray. You can accept, no pun intended, you can accept how good of a player Christian Gray was last year, but also say he's not a finished product. Arguably, he's nowhere near close to a finished product. But what should leave fans excited is the flashes we saw in those moments. The game-ending interception against Penn State that helped set up Notre Dame's final drive to get into field goal range. The pick 6 that ultimately sealed the game and sent Notre Dame onto a home playoff bid. The 4th and 2 stop against Texas A&M that sealed that game. You can't just look at that and completely disregard the other, but you can't just only look at the negative and move past. Christian Gray was not as consistent of a football player after his injury. Doesn't mean he was bad, because he still had amazing moments after the injury. Argument could be made that some of his most amazing moments came after he was injured. But then that's where the inconsistencies started to fall in, and that's just where he's going to have to be at. Sometimes it's just a life of a corner. You're only going to get recognized for interceptions and touchdowns caught on.
Especially when you're talking about people who only watch you on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Because usually when you're only watching on TV, you only see a cornerback when they either make an interception, break up, or give up a pass. You don't see the 10 plays in a row where the guy he was covering just never sniffed the football or didn't sniff being open.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but like you said, that consistency from him has to be better. And look, because I could say this, here's some spin. All right, let's spin. Christian Gray gave up 583 yards passing last year. It's a pretty decent amount of yards. But for a normal season, but it was in 15 games for him. So it's a little bit more than what we've seen guys give up in the past. So if you look at, for example, let me pull up Benjamin Morrison. Benjamin Morrison's first year as a starter at Notre Dame, he gave up 296 yards. So you're like, well, man, you gave up 583. You're nowhere close to as good as Benjamin Morrison. Well, Benjamin Morrison played 13 games. that season. Christian Gray last year played 16 games. He played almost 200 more snaps than what Benjamin Morrison played. But you could look at it and say, look, here's some spin from that. So he gave up 583 yards last season, gave up 130 of those yards in one game against USC and 126 of those yards in one game against Ohio State. Say, well, he only gave up 327 in the other 13 games that he played because he only played 15 last year. Well, that starts putting it in a little bit more perspective, and you start to say, like, well, that gets him right in line with where Benjamin Morrison would have been in a 13 game season. Well, yeah, that's true. And that shows how good Christian can be. Because if you look at his PFF numbers, the rest of the time, the number of yards he gave up was 29, 2, 3, 27, 17, 16, 18, 0, 0, 57, 92 against Georgia, came on one play, gave up supposedly 24 yards against Penn State. I'm like, I don't know how he gave those up since the receivers didn't catch any passes, but I'm actually going to go look that up real quick and see what they count that as. But like, that's a lot of games where he didn't give up anything. But that's spin. That's because he did give up 256 yards in 2 games. Because that's the other way to spin it is dude gave up 256 yards in 2 games. Benjamin Morrison gave up 296 yards in 13. Like you can spin this any way you want to do it. For Christian, it's going to be about get rid of those games and you're a good football. Like play better than you did in those 2 games. And the conversation about you is very different. You played 15 games last year. 15 games. 2 of them you weren't very good. If you can play better in all those other games, then the narrative about you changes and your impact changes. Apparently he gave up 20 yards on a play to the tight end, Khalil Dinkins. So I think remember that crossing route? They're blaming him for that. And then a 4-yard gain to Tyler Warren on a screenplay. They're giving him the catch on that. So, like I said, it speaks to how well he played that game. But that's the thing, Travis. I can spin Christian Gray's stats either way I wanted to make him look better than he was and make him look a lot worse than he was. For him, it's going to be about eliminate those 2 games. And we're having a much different conference. And really, it's one play against Ohio State.
Yeah.
Eliminate those, and you're one of the better corners in college football, in my opinion. That's going to be the key for him.
Well, absolutely. And I think some Notre Dame fans look at the Ohio State game this past year a little bit unfair to Christian because they know what Ben Morrison did against Marvin Harrison in 2023. It's different circumstances.
And different player. With all due respect to Marvin Harrison Jr., he's not Jeremiah Smith.
And no, agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. And with all due respect to Christian Gray, he's not Ben Morrison yet. So it's just the levels are completely
He's more athletic
different
than Benjamin. He's just not the technical, proficient.
Agreed.
Like high football IQ isn't there yet for what Benjamin was. It's just not there yet.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he's got to get to. That's what he needs to be working towards this offseason, is becoming a more consistently technically proficient player.
Yeah.
That's going to be a key.
Yeah. And like we've said, from that national championship game, sometimes you just have to tip your cap to the better player, better team that day. And that's what happened. I don't put too much weight with what happened against Ohio State. It has to be better. Ideally, he doesn't give up over 100 yards in the national championship game. But I can live with, 70, 80 against the best returning receiver in college football if they match up again. The USC game needs cleaned up. I'm not one of those people that believes that the pick 6 negates the 7 receptions for $143 and 2 touchdowns. My mind just doesn't work that way.
No,
because all of that stuff happened.
And you could argue that those plays happening is why you needed that play to seal the game. That's part of the reason. You have to look at all of it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be one to say, and that's why I gave those 2 spin areas, Trev, is I could spin it this way or I could spin it that way. But the reality is you shouldn't spin it either way. You need to look at both of them and say, this is where he is when he's on his game. This is where he is when he isn't. The USC game being a great example, Trevor, that you're saying is that play at the end of the game, great play. The 4th and 2 stop, great play. But all that stuff in between, dude, You got to be better than that. You are better than that.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. But Christian, I mean, what leaves you so confident and excited about this team is we're talking about a player in this tandem that, one, people throughout the program believe to still be probably maybe the most talented cornerback on this roster. And he's a part of a tandem of a guy who was put in our star player bucket. And that's the tandem. You know, we're talking about a guy in a light that, yes, you have to get better. Like, we're almost saying, which we're not, but we're kind of saying it's like, hey, dude, a 98-yard pick six isn't enough. You have to clean up some of the other stuff in between, which is true. But that's the spot that Notre Dame is in now as a team with guys like this. And that's really exciting. But Christian Gray is absolutely in a spot where he can have that kind of season. And it's not a common theme throughout this offseason. We're not asking him to do anything that is out of his realm of physical capabilities or mental capabilities. It's just, hey, you're going into year 2 as a full-time starter. This is kind of the expected progression that you make. And he's doing it under the tutelage of Mike Mickens. A lot of things pointing in the right direction. Bryan, any final thoughts on the defensive side of the ball for this conversation?
There's a lot of other guys we could have talked about, Trevor. You mentioned Junior Tuiamaka as a guy that we could have mentioned. I talked about a Don Schuler as one. You know, we could talk about maybe Gabriel Rubio, but I think there's definitely a category that Gabriel Rubio fits in more than underrated, underappreciated. I don't actually think he is. I think he's more of a, you got to step up. But I think that he's underrated in the standpoint of we're all talking about all these guys that could be potential D-line stars. We talk about Bryce Young and Boubacar and maybe Josh Burnham and Jason Onye and Jared Dawson and Armel Mulcaman. It's like we just kind of just don't talk about Gabriel Rubio anymore. Yeah. Well, part of that's on him, and we'll talk about that in a later show also. I mean, you could look at Kingston Viliama-Asa from a national standpoint, doesn't get talked enough about as a potential star player. He's not overlooked and underappreciated by Notre Dame fans, for sure. I think Notre Dame fans appreciate how good he is and how good he's going to be. You know, but nationally doesn't get talked about a ton. And I really believe that there's a perception of the Notre Dame defense that it was just this incredibly well-coached team that didn't have a lot of great players in it. That's like I felt like that was kind of the tone that I felt was behind the question that I got asked about the defense and about Al Washington or Al Golden leaving. And the tone behind a lot of the writing of like, I don't know how they're going to thrive without Al Golden, you know, making these average players look better. And I'm like, guys, have you seen how many of these Notre Dame players have got drafted? No, they're not first and second round draft picks, but they're still NFL football players. I mean, their entire starting linebacker room starting lineup at linebacker in 2023 got drafted in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th round. That's pretty good. You know, Xavier Watts was a 3rd round pick. Riley Mills is an early 4th round pick, despite the fact he had a torn ACL. Jack Kaiser went early in the 4th round in this draft. And, you know, everybody talks about, you know, well, here's where Jeremiah Love would get drafted if he was draft eligible. Where would Leonard Moore get drafted if he was draft eligible? Maybe he's not a 1st round pick, but he's going pretty early. And there's just a lot more of those guys in this team than people give credit for. And I think that's my overall takeaway is I don't think people recognize how good they are. And we actually had a super chat that I want to kind of bring up that fits into this part of the conversation, Trevor. It's from Isaac. And thank you for the super chat, Isaac. But he says the non-respect thing Notre Dame faces compared to teams like OSU, Georgia, and Texas is a recruiting rankings thing. Right or wrong, I think that's the reason why. And I tend to agree with you because I don't think the recruiting rankings that people look at were ones where some of these players are getting the proper respect. I think that's very true. Boubacar Traore wasn't a guy that was ranked all that high. Drake Bowen was ranked high by rivals in ESPN, but he wasn't ranked high by 247, which is the one most people tend to look at, which is ironic because I think it's by far the worst rankings of them all. I think people are still convinced that Barton Simmons still works at 247, but he doesn't. Their rankings are terrible, but that's the one that everybody looks at. And there's a lot of guys that Leonard Moore wasn't ranked real high. He's getting love. Well, that's because he was too good not to ignore. I think part of the reason that a Don Schuler doesn't get the love that he gets is because he wasn't a super highly ranked recruit. I think that's absolutely fair. Nobody had a Don Schuler in the top 100. Most people had him as a 4-star, but rivals had him as a 3-star. On3 ranked him number 269 overall. 247 didn't even think he was one of the 247 best players in the country that year. Yeah, they had 26 safeties ranked ahead of Adon Schuler. Rivals have 39 safeties ranked ahead of Adon Schuler coming out that year. So I do think that, especially on defense, the perception of them being a bunch of try-hard guys is because the guys that are their best players weren't super highly ranked. And some of the guys that get a lot of hype, Jalen Sneed, guys like that, are guys that were highly ranked. And I think that's true for the Notre Dame fan base as well. That's why every time Jalen Sneed makes a play, it becomes a bigger story because everybody's waiting on him to turn into that 5-star player that he was coming out of high school.
I think some of it, too, is I think it's recruiting rankings and it's NFL draft stock. I saw a mock, not a mock, I saw like NFL 2026 NFL quarterback draft prospects, like ranked top to bottom. And I started to kind of draw a little, the dots started connecting in my head. And it's like, okay, well, you have Lenora Sellers on this list 4th. A lot of people high on South Carolina. You have Arch Manning in this 1st, and he has yet to start more than 4 games in college. You have Garrett Nussmeier on this list at 3rd, and a lot of people are putting LSU above Notre Dame. But a lot of Notre Dame's draft eligible, like the high-end talent, like we've talked about so far this offseason, the Bryce Youngs, the Leonard Moores, kids like that, they're not even draft eligible in 2026. I think in combination with recruiting rankings, I think NFL draft buzz also kind of plays a role in how people view Notre Dame as well, just based on past results. And I mean, think about it. Notre Dame didn't have a single offensive lineman taken this past draft, and people are now talking about like how Notre Dame is just kind of this like, they had a Cinderella story type of season.
Yeah. Coaches understand it though.
Mm-hmm.
If I could tell you guys some of the stuff that I was told this offseason about what was being offered to Notre Dame's players, even defensive players. I'm not talking about Jeremiah Love. Defensive players. Leonard Moore getting 7-figure offers. Adon Schuler getting 7-figure offers. I don't think the number that was thrown out that I've heard about, like somebody told me that Adon Schuler got offered $3 million. I don't think that's true, because I think if he got offered $3 million, he might be playing somewhere else. I don't think that's true, at least not for a season. But I know for a fact, and even Archer in the chat said that Ohio State tried to flip Adon Schuler late in the recruiting process. So did Georgia. And Georgia tried to buy him again this offseason. But Adon's at Notre Dame for reasons beyond just money. And if you know anything about the Schuler family, you understand, like all families, yeah, we'd like to be compensated for, but that's not the driver of the decisions that where our son is making for where he's going to go to school, because Adon understands this amount at Notre Dame means a lot more because of what this is going to do for me. But the point is, Georgia is going to be considered by a lot of the normie media as having a better, talent base than what Notre Dame is going to have. That's why they're ranked ahead of them still. But football people know that Notre Dame secondary is better than Georgia's secondary. And Georgia's coaches know that Notre Dame's secondary is better than their secondary, which is why they tried to buy multiple players from Notre Dame's secondary this offseason. I want to read a comment, because I think this is the dichotomy. Is there's the media, what the media believes, and what the coaches believe. And I've shared the story about the 2018 Notre Dame team that I was told back then, and it was true of that team too, where I have friends in the coaching profession, and I had a friend call me and say he was talking, he was in, I think, the ACC at the time, but he's like, the buzz was Clemson's coaches were calling their buddies like, dude, we're going to win it all. Because this is between the Notre Dame and Bama game, because like we were never worried about Bama. We're going to smoke Bama. We were worried about Notre Dame because they were popping in that film scene like NFL players all over the team. And this is a comment so Bruce Feldman had a very eye-opening article that he put out at The Athletic before the title game. And he just talked to a bunch of different coaches off the record. Here's some comments from that game, but this is one that really, I think, epitomizes kind of what I feel. And this is a quote from a DB coach who played against Notre Dame. He doesn't say who it was. He goes, I don't think people realize how good of a team Notre Dame is. I didn't realize it till we played them. They're effing really good. Their DBs, man, their defense is aggressive. So they're such a well-coached team. They have good synergy, blah, 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 blah. But he talked about they're a lot better than what people think. And that's where I think people kind of miss the boat about how good this team is. And I think coaches know it. Coaches definitely see it. I think what they did to Georgia last year opened up a lot of eyes from the coaching standpoint that made people realize, like, hey, this team is a lot better than I think people think that it is. And you're going to see that even more this year. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about what this team can be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to your point, Bryan, it is a lot of the football people, not just beat writers and people that work for major outlets strictly as sports writers, but actual people with football knowledge. Even some of the less popular people, like mainstream people that people don't like, but like as much as people don't want to admit it, like Kirk Herbstreit and Joel Klatt are like football people. They played, and I disagree with sometimes how they present themselves on broadcasts. But even after the Texas A&M game, Kirk Herbstreit was talking about, it's like, hey, like, this Notre Dame team has like SEC size and length. And Joel Klatt, when he released his post-spring top 25, talked about, like, Notre Dame is getting fast. Like, they're fast. They're long.
Because he saw them in person last year. And he realized, like, wow, these guys can run. Yeah. Kirk Herbstreit drives me nuts, though, because he'll say things like that, and then he'll be on the show, and he'll just give, like, the most – I'm going to – like, Kirk Herbstreit's one of those go-along to get-along guys. He'll buy he'll stay on the narratives. He doesn't want to go too far off the narratives because he wants to be liked and all that kind of stuff. But, yes, I mean, you see that. Yeah, you see that, and I think, I think that's part of the reason that James Franklin and Kirby Smart both did. People like, why did Kirby Smart try to go for it late in that second quarter? Why did James Franklin go for it late in that game? Two coaches with a lot of success made very poor coaching decisions. Why? I think they felt the pressure. Like, we've got to do something here. They flinched. Why did they flinch? Because they're in a game where they're like, this team right here is better than us. And if we don't go do something, it's like, I think Penn State knew they were cooked a little bit, or they were in trouble when Notre Dame went right down the field and tied the game in the third quarter. And that ended up being a back and forth affair, and I was impressed by how hard Penn State battled. But they're like, dude, we threw everything we had at this team. And just like that, it's a 10-10 ball game. I think you kind of know you're in trouble. And I think Georgia knew if they didn't go down there and get something, they were going to have a tough time with that team. Notre Dame had all the momentum, and I think they knew they'd caught some breaks. And then, of course, Notre Dame makes that big play. But I just think they flinched. And I think they flinched because they knew, like, God, we got to do something because this team right now is kicking our butt in the trenches, and they're getting after it, and they're starting to get hot. They had just gone on a drive. They're starting to get hot.
Well, and that's something for me. Speaking strictly from my fandom, that has been a narrative that I've also had to put aside. Because I've gone into watching Notre Dame games like, yeah, they're just going to kind of have to play the game of their life to win this one at some spots. I didn't get to see 88. I didn't get to see 89. I didn't get to see 93. So my entire fandom was always like, they have some good players. 05, 06, they had good players. 18, they had good players. 2012, they had great players, 15 great players, but there were games in that stretch of time where it's like, they're just going to have to play better than they've played this entire season. Whereas last year, the conversation was like, yeah, they have to play their style of football. And what two games last year did they not, in some facet, play their style of football? Northern Illinois and on defense in the national championship game. They didn't play their style of football. And I've never got to say that before. And so I'm not sympathizing or empathizing with national media people because it's also like, hey, if this is your job, do the research on this team. Right. That is a very good team. But to a small degree, like, I get it because I also had to remove myself from that mindset, but I did. And that's the difference for me.
I get that.
Frustrating.
Because I'm a lot more sympathetic to where Notre Dame was ranked last year than I am this year.
Sure.
They were 11th, 10th, 11th, 12th, a lot of people, sometimes 8, 9. And I'd say, look, I'd have them higher, but I understand why people don't. I get it. I don't now. I don't sympathize with them now
Yeah.
Because of what we just witnessed. Because to your point, Trevor, prior to this season, that was always the case. They needed to play that perfect game to beat Clemson or Alabama or, teams like that. Especially when Clemson was good, 2018 and in 2020. But that's not the case now. It's not the case now. And that's my thing is that's why I'm like, I don't understand it with this team. I understood it going into last offseason because I understood I don't expect them to know as much about this team that I do.
Sure.
For different reasons. But now when you just saw what we just saw, and then you're like, man, Notre Dame only had 6 guys drafted, huh? But see, the problem is a lot of people will see that and be like, oh, see, this is what we're talking about, just try hard team. No, it's because most of their best players are coming back and they played a deep rotation. But you're starting to hear it more from, like, you'll hear David Pollack make comments about it. Even Todd McShay had some comments about Notre Dame in the postseason where he was like, there's different cats here. Now, of course, then he started talking about how good Ashton Craig was. And I'm like, bruh, my dude ain't been around in a minute, but, it is what it is. He's a draft guy. But you'll see it with Greg McElroy. You'll see it with Cole Kubelik. You'll see it with some of the football people more and more and more. I've even seen things from like Booger McFarland where he said things about Notre Dame. And you're like, that's an SEC guy saying that about. It's starting to happen with the football people. You're going to need one more deep run, in my opinion, but there's still going to be some people. Andy Staples, who actually played college football at Florida, is very high on this Notre Dame football team. But his compadre, Ari Weiserman, who's not a former college football player as far as I know, isn't as high on this Notre Dame team. I give Ari a pass because Ari picked Notre Dame to make a run to the title game last year when they posted the bracket. He had them in the title game. But again, I think Ari's fallen a little bit victim to some of the narrative-based stuff. I think he was able to evaluate last year's team for what it was, and he did a very fair job of that, which is why he had Notre Dame in the title game. But now that we're in the offseason and it's a bunch, maybe some guys we don't know, now he's kind of fallen victim to some of the narrative-type stuff. So, and not all football people know the game. So that's why we're going to ignore the Danny Cannell comments because he doesn't know football, I don't believe. I also think he says things for effect to get clicks and likes and all that other kind of stuff. But not everybody that played football knows football. But a lot of those guys are starting to come around on this Notre Dame roster. Some are. The football people. The media is the ones falling behind.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
Agreed.
And that's going to lead us into our final topic, which is a media-driven conversation that has me very fired up today.
Well, that'll do it for the defensive portion of this show, but don't go anywhere. We still have one more segment to talk about. We're going to start breaking down the narrative around Notre Dame's transfer portal class. But before we get there, you guys know what to do. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so you know when we go live. Be sure to share this podcast, whatever streaming platform you listen to this on. We would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But you guys know what it is. Look, best way to support what we do here. You see it scrolling down there. Check out the premium message boards. Go to the Champions Lounge. A lot of the conversations that Bryan and I have on a day-to-day basis go on in the Champions Lounge. You can find all that at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bryan, to tie a bow on today's show, we are going to talk about the transfer portal class. The theme for today's show, quick reminder, is we're talking about underrated players, underappreciated players. Today, we're going to kind of widen the scope, and we're going to talk about Notre Dame's transfer portal class as a whole. Because in comparison to where they fall in some other teams, Notre Dame's transfer portal class is not being looked at in the same light, under the same criteria as what some other schools might be. And that's where we're going to begin the segment today, Bryan.
Yeah, and it's really come up, shocker, with some stuff that ESPN's put out lately. And a little bit of what we talked about yesterday, Trev, is we kind of dove into yesterday there was a conversation on ESPN about, about who won the offseason. And guys that they just like completely ignored. And then other guys for other teams that they're like, this is a great pickup because they got this guy over here who's not as good as the guys that Notre Dame got. And they talk about them. And then you're just like, I don't understand what exactly is going on right now. And when we look at this, the conversation around Notre Dame, for example, it got me a little fired up. And then like later in the day, they had top 100 portal players come out. And I put a list together for us to look at, Trev, because I looked at it and I just kind of had to laugh. But I sent you some statistics to compare, like Malachi Fields, for example, and Will Pauling, two guys that other people perceive as big pickups. And it speaks to a very clear SEC bias, whether it's, and most of this is guys that are going to play for SEC schools. If you look at the tops, so when they came out with this ranking, there were, was it 7 guys ranked ahead of Malachi Fields at wide receiver. You had guys going to Auburn, Georgia, where's Nick Anderson going? LSU, right? And then one guy going to Nebraska, but he came from an SEC school. Another guy going to LSU, another guy going to Texas A&M, and then the guy going to Florida State. And then you got Malachi Fields and Will Pauling down there from non-traditional schools, not really Southern schools. I'm from Virginia. Southern people don't claim Virginia as a Southern state. Northern people don't claim Virginia as a Northern state. They're just kind of out there. But, it's not a traditional Southern state the way that a South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi are. And I look at it, start comparing the numbers, and they had Eric Singleton, for example, from Georgia Tech, who's going to Auburn, who I like as a very, very good football player, as the number 6 overall player in the transfer portal, number 1 receiver. Last 2 years, he's caught 48 and 56 passes for 714 and 754 yards. This past year, he averaged 13.5 yards per catch, and he had 3 touchdowns. Malachi Fields is the number 8 receiver from the same league, had 55 catches for 808 yards, 5 touchdowns, averaged 14.7 yards per catch. He was a whole 1.3 yards per play higher than what Eric Singleton is, who, when you read them talk about, is like this big play weapon, which he is. He's a good football player. I'm not trying to say that Eric Singleton's not a good football player, but it's like, okay, well, that guy, why is that guy getting all this love and this other guy isn't, right? I don't understand why, kind of why that's happening. And then you look at Eric Singleton and you look at what he did against Notre Dame, for example, who had arguably the best pass defense in college football last year. And you say, okay, well, what did he do against Notre Dame? This stud that's going to Auburn. He had 6 catches for 59 yards. I think 2 or 3 of those catches were on shovels, like averaged less than 9 yards a catch. Malachi Fields against Notre Dame last season had 4 catches for 81 yards against Notre Dame. And you start to say, like, well, I just don't understand why this guy is getting this level. Hey, Eric Singleton had a really good game against Louisville. He had 5 catches for 88 yards. All right, cool, good stuff. Malachi Fields had 9 catches for 129 yards against Louisville. Like, you can compare them against the same teams and say, this guy was more productive than that guy. Why is this guy considered the number 6 overall player, and this guy's considered the number 8 wide receiver? You go down the list. You know who the number 2 receiver in this class was, Trev? Zachariah Branch. Number 8 portal player in the country, going to Georgia. Well, and here's a direct quote. This is hilarious. This is literally a direct quote from this ranking of the top 100 portal players about Zachariah Branch. I just found this to be absolutely hilarious. Let me pull this up here real quick. So let's go to Zachariah Branch. All right, go to here. Okay, so he's a number 8 player overall. And this is what they said. Branch is a big-time upgrade for a Georgia offense that must replace leading receivers Arian Smith and Dominic Levitt. Big-time upgrade over guys for that receiving core. And I'm thinking, how in the world is that a big-time upgrade on offense? What are we talking about here? Arian Smith last year had 48 catches for 817 yards and 4 touchdowns. He averaged 17 yards a carry. Zachariah Branch had 47 catches for 503 yards, 10.7 yards per catch, 1 touchdown. As a freshman, 31 catches for 320 yards, 10.3 per catch, 2 touchdowns. And they said this about him, which I just kind of chuckled. He said that the speed transferred to the field immediately as a returner. His special teams production dipped as a sophomore, but that might be more related to opponent scheme than a diminishing skill. That's fine. He was a very good, very dynamic returner. In the passing game, he's what you'd expect. A big play weapon in the screen game, jet sweeps, and on quick slants and crossers that get him the ball in space. He's an underneath mismatch and a great yak target. A guy that averaged 10.7 yards per catch and as a sophomore and 10.3 yards per catch as a freshman in USC's offense is a big play weapon based on what? Like, were you watching the same film that I was watching last year? I don't think you were. And he had 2 carries last year for 17 yards. It's not like you're misleading Bryan because he had carries and stuff like that. Like, no, he had 2 for 17 yards. Like, what are we talking about here? Like with Eric Singleton, you could say, hey, look, if you're going to compare his numbers to Malachi Fields, you need to add his rushing numbers because he had 131 rushing yards. That'd be a fair counter to that. Zechariah Branch had 2 carries for 17 yards last year. Number 6 player in the country. Number 10 is Nick Anderson, who didn't even play last year. Now, he was very good as a freshman. Very good as a freshman. 38 catches, 798 yards, 10 touchdowns in the Big 12. That's good. Okay, I'm fine with that. Then you had 2 receivers from Kentucky. My question is this. If the guys for Kentucky were so good, then why did Kentucky's offense suck so bad? Why is their offense so bad? They had 2 top 15 transfer portal players, the number 4 and number 5 player in the country. One had 47 catches for 715 yards, 2 touchdowns. Good season, solid season. 42 catches for 636 yards and 6 touchdowns the year before. The other guy from Kentucky, that's Dane Key going to Nebraska. The other guy, Barian Brown from Kentucky, 29 catches for 361 yards, 3 touchdowns last year, and then 43 catches for 539 yards and 4 touchdowns. But Malachi Fields is over 50 and over 800 both years. Like, what are you seeing? Now, well, the film tells us. I understand that. I've watched all these guys on film. And I'm telling you, there's a reason that I feel the way that I feel. And then you look at Kevin Concepcion. I've talked a lot about Kevin Concepcion. We don't need to go down that path again. The last one that got me was Deuce Robinson. This was hilarious.
Yeah.
I saw this and I was like, you've got to be flipping kidding me. They had Deuce Robinson as the number 26 overall portal player in the country and ahead of Malachi Fields. And this is what they said about him. It's wild to read this. He said, it's easy to see the fit here, given how successful 6'6" wideout Johnny Wilson was. Under Mike Norvell with the Seminoles. He says Robinson is one of the most athletically gifted prospects in the class of 2023. They talk about, Robinson is a gigantic target out wide with 6'6.5" height and an 82-inch wingspan. He's a smooth mover with natural ball skills who's capable of hauling in poorly thrown balls. Robinson developed as a red zone threat in 2024. He had 5 touchdowns. All right. Let's see how that one goes. But he's not overly sudden and only possesses adequate top-end speed for the receiver position, as many, including us, felt his brightest future might have been at tight end coming out of high school. That's the write-up for a guy that you rank 16 spots ahead of Malachi Fields in your ranking? What? Like, I'm reading what you're not even praising him that much other than he was a highly ranked recruit. And we thought he might have been a tight end. Like, what are we doing here? And this is what it comes down to, Trev. It's freaking frustrating. And this is what they said about Malachi Fields. Because if you actually read what they said about Malachi, you're like, I don't understand why he's here. They said about Malachi, Fields is an exceptional athlete with excellent size and production. He put up 1,619 receiving yards over the past 2 seasons, 3rd most in the ACC, and 10 touchdowns on 113 receptions over the past 2 seasons, and picked up 3rd team all-conference recognition in 2024 after another 800-yard season. Fields has an NFL blend of size, athleticism, and ball skills. He also has very good production. The former high school quarterback has great awareness skills on the football field. He's a polished, savvy route runner who knows how to attack leverage and work for positioning. His pure separation burst is good, not great. It's fair. He wins one-on-one matchups more with his physical strength and positioning than speed. Fields makes the difficult grabs look easy and dominates the 50-50 ball. How's that guy ranked 16 spots behind what you just wrote about Deuce Robinson? Let's also add the fact that Deuce Robinson over the last 2 years has fewer yards combined over the last 2 years than what Malachi Fields had last year in Virginia's offense with those quarterbacks. It just, And by the way, Deuce Robinson was catching passes from a guy that you had also had ranked ahead of Malachi Fields in your portal rankings. This is what frustrates me. It's like, had Malachi Fields jumped in the portal and gone to Georgia, I guarantee you he would not be ranked 42nd. Will Pauling wasn't even ranked in the top 100. A guy who 2 years ago in the Big Ten had 74 catches for 837 yards and 6 touchdowns, including over 100 yards in a bowl game against LSU. Well, he wasn't that good last year. Okay, fair. His numbers looked very comparable to Kevin Concepcion in his down year. So 2 years ago, everybody talks about how good Kevin Concepcion was. He had 71 catches for 839 yards and 10 touchdowns. Pretty good. Will Pauling had 74 catches for 837 yards and 6 touchdowns. How are they any different? Last year, Kevin Concepcion had 53 catches for 460 yards and 6 touchdowns. He played the whole season. Will Pauling had 42 catches for 407 yards, 3 touchdowns, averages a whole yard more per catch than Kevin Concepcion. Why is this guy considered not even a top 100 player, but this guy over here is one of your 25 best portal pickups? Do you think if Will Pauling would have gone to Texas A&M, he'd be outside the top 100? I don't think that he would. And that's why it's so obvious now that you're doing this, that it's like, this is why you guys keep missing on Notre Dame, because you have agendas. It's not built on the film. There's no film you can watch that says this guy should be better than that guy. There's none that you can watch. And you can say, well, this guy had to share more carries than this guy. Okay, I'll counter that with everybody on the field knew that the only guy that you had to worry about was Malachi Fields. The only guy you had to worry about last year. 2 years ago, different story, had Malik White. Last year, nobody was worried about anybody other than Malachi Fields, and he still produced. Still produced. So no matter how you spin it, it's not a believable argument. It's not. And if he was, and here's the thing, if he was that good of a player, he's not splitting carries with all the catches with all these other players. He's not. But here's the other thing. Here's my other counter to that. Let's look up USC's numbers last year, Trev. Let's go to USC's numbers. Southern Cal, receiving. Okay. Where's Kyron Hudson in this conversation? Where's he in this conversation? Where's he in the rankings? Did you see him in the rankings?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Yeah, he was 58th. Well, hold on a second. He was a more productive player for USC than Deuce Robinson. So you talk about splitting catches and all that. Okay, well, this guy had more production. I would argue had some bigger game moments. Did you watch him against LSU last year? Why is Deuce Robinson 32 spots ahead of him from the same offense? It's nothing but recruiting rankings. That's it. Because you read his write-up, and if you read the write-up that – actually, no, I'm sorry. That's Micah Hudson at 58. It's not even the other one. The other one's –
They put Micah Hudson at 58 for transfer portal. Like overall transfer portal players?
Yes, number 58 overall portal player.
Dude.
But actually, I'm wrong. If you look at Kyron Hudson, he's not even in the top 100. So that's what I get to. It's frustrating because it's so clearly agenda driven that it's like, even if you read the analysis that the scout guy came up with, it doesn't match the rankings. That's the problem.
I think it is beyond silly that Micah Hudson is ranked in transfer portal rankings. Yes. I truly do.
It's all about high school recruiting. That's the only reason you have him there and Zechariah Branch at 8th.
Like, going back to the school that you left shouldn't be a grade for your incoming transfer portal class. Because if that's the case, then Jeremiah Love should enter the transfer portal and then just go back to Notre Dame. Like, I think that's super silly. I completely disagree with where Malachi Fields was put on that list. I really, really disagree with where they put Concepcion. I know we've talked about that quite a bit. My only thing with Will Pauling, I think he still should have been ranked in the top 100. He is coming off of an injury. I will say, like a season where he was banged up. So I think I would have
their
been
number 10 receiver who didn't play a down last year.
Oh, yeah, that's why I'm saying. Like, I don't think that the gap between Concepcion and Will Pauling should have been as great. But
my point is they can't use that because Nick Anderson is their number 10 overall portal player. He didn't play a snap last year.
Sure.
I'm not actually against where he's ranked because the injury he had is not one that's long-term. It's one that he should be back from. And if you look at what he did as a freshman in 2023, averaged over 20 yards a catch, had 10 touchdowns had 38 catches. 10 of them went for touchdowns in a Power 5 league. That's really good. Really good. But so like somebody puts, you're correct, Trev. I agree with you, but they can't use that as an excuse
absolutely
not to have him in the top 100.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, absolutely. I mean, and that's, again, it just kind of goes back into why these lists continue to frustrate us. It's the overlooking that Notre Dame keeps, for whatever reason, getting all that attention drawn to them. And I think that's kind of big picture of this entire transfer portal class. And that's just wide receivers. We haven't really even talked about, like Jalen Stroman and where he's been ranked. And
that's my other thing is like there's no Jared Dawson in here. Like I saw something the other day, and I can't remember the player, but I was looking at 247 Sports transfer portal rankings for defense. And there's a guy going to Missouri who was a highly ranked recruit from some SEC school, had 3 tackles last year. And he's considered a 4-star transfer portal recruit. Not 4-star because they give the transfer ranking and the high school ranking. 4-star. Jared Dawson, 3-star. And I'm thinking, other than the fact this guy was a highly ranked recruit, what are you basing this off of? What are you basing off this guy being he couldn't get on the field last year? I'm actually going to go look that ranking up because it was so absurd. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And so you then start to say like, well, okay, well, look, how are you going to say this if you're going to, I don't understand how you can say you're going to have like this guy ranked here as a transfer player based on what? I don't understand how you can come to these conclusions. And it gets really frustrating. It gets really frustrating because it's one of those things where it's like these narratives do impact how a team is perceived. They do. You can say it doesn't. You can say it doesn't matter. It doesn't change your ability to win games or lose games, but it does matter to a lot of these kids who are now looking to go into this thing, get more money, which comes from recognition and NIL and all this. But when if I go to Notre Dame, I'm not going to get the same love as I'm going to get as if I go over here. Then that starts to impact who you're going to land and who you're going to get, or at least it could. It doesn't necessarily always do that, but it could. And that's the frustration with this whole thing, Trev, is you look at these things, you say, just be honest, be fair. Don't get your agendas out of this crap. And just, if you're going to do a ranking, well, they haven't evaluated that guy. Well, then don't rank him. Give him a no ranking. Say, hey, we haven't evaluated him. So we can't really properly evaluate this guy because we haven't really ranked them. So that's kind of what really just kind of ticks me off about this whole thing, because these things matter more than people realize.
Oh yeah,
they do. Like the number 1 portal player in this year's portal class, according to 247 Sports, was Nico. Patrick Pate was number 7. Deuce Robinson was number 8, according to 247 Sports. Dylan Thieneman was number 11.
Dude, don't even get me started. Don't even get me started.
Zechariah Branch, number 12. Like, what are we doing here? What are we doing?
I went back and I watched the Purdue game the other day just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll have to go back and watch it again. I'm pretty sure that Dylan Thieneman had a missed tackle on every Notre Dame touchdown in the first half.
I believe he did, actually.
Like
he missed Riley Leonard on both of his touchdown runs.
Missed Jadarian.
Completely whiffed on Jadarian. The only one I'm unsure of is the first one from Jeremiah. I'd have to go back and look at that one.
Yep.
Because I know Jeremiah outran some dudes. Like, was he one of the guys that missed on that one?
I don't know. I I think Thieneman was like the last one to get him right before he crossed the goal line, so I don't think that would go down as a missed tackle. But, I mean, the only touchdown in the first half that he didn't have a missed tackle on was Boubacar's pick six.
Yeah.
Which, if he was on the field, he might have missed that tackle too.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're talking about a.
That's so salty. I absolutely love it.
I
absolutely love it.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness gracious. Yeah, I don't give him one on the Jeremiah one. He was coming from behind. He didn't have an angle. So, yeah. I don't blame him on that one. He was there as he crossed the goal line, but that wasn't on him. But other than that, you know.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
But do you remember offhand where Isaiah?
No, that one game doesn't define his whole career. But again, it's the point is this is a hype ranking, not a evaluation of the film ranking. That's my point with all of this. It's hype. It's about there's nothing you can do. Here's the thing: if you want to put Zechariah Branch higher because of what he does as a kick returner, I'm fine with that. Put him in the top 50, not the top 10, in the top 15. That's the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Do you remember offhand where Isaiah Horton was ranked? Because I really like that portal pickup for Bama.
Yeah.
And he's someone that, like, I'm interested to see if that kind of followed the SEC stigma.
It didn't. He is one of those ones that doesn't get that same attention. And I don't understand why. He is 63rd according to ESPN. I mean, to 247 Sports. He's 63rd behind Jaheim Otis, Bear Alexander, Mario Craver, who's transferred from Mississippi State, who has done like almost nothing. So yeah, he's very low. Let me see where they have Malachi Fields. I'm going to look up him. I'm going to look him up on the ESPN ones. Give me a second. Where is he? Because he's 66th there. But yes. I don't see how you have him 66th and you have him below Micah Hudson. I don't get that one.
I could go on a whole separate segment about how I feel about the Micah Hudson thing.
Yeah.
It is what it is.
Yes. And if you want to ask why you think they're hyping up Dylan Thieneman, I don't think it's just about where he's going. I think he has a reputation based on what he did as a freshman that they're still living off of, and the fact he's going to Oregon. It's a hot program. So it's about where they're going as also on top of where they're coming from. I don't think Kevin Concepcion is getting overhyped because he came from NC State. I think he's getting overhyped because he has a reputation of what he did as a freshman, which I thought was overplayed. But it's the fact he's going to Texas A&M. If he was going to Louisville, do you think he'd still be ranked as high as he's ranked? I don't think he would.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that frustrates me is it just kind of gets back to you're going to say Zechariah Branch is an upgrade over Arian Smith and Dominic Lovett. He's never produced nearly as close as what those guys produced. Maybe he ends up being so, and I look silly when we come back and talk about this. But there's nothing to look at it now and say, hey, this is what it should be. You know?
Yep. Agreed. No, I agree, man. Any final thoughts on the transfer portal segment before?
I think this transfer portal class is going to come back this end of the year, and we're going to look back and say, like, this is a really good transfer portal class. I don't know if they're going to have as many prominent roles as past portal classes have had, though. Outside, because like there was only 2 guys from Notre Dame ranked in the top 100 according to ESPN, and it was Devontae Smith, who was ranked, I think it was 95th. He was ranked 95th in the portal and in the top 100. And then let me see here real quick. Do they have him? Is he on the top 100 let's see here. I got 247 Sports. I got their top 150 for 247 Sports, and he is not on there. So let's see if we expand it out to 200. He's 156th on the rankings from 247 Sports. Will Pauling is not in their top 150.
Yeah, that's pretty wild.
He's not among their 150 best players coming in right now. Let's see if we got to 250. Actually, he's not in their top 200. Let's expand it to 250 and see if we can get him in there. Nope, he's not among their top 250 players in the portal. So, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Like, Hakeem Williams is 161st. Will Pauling's not in the top 250. Jared Dawson, not in the top 250. Jalen Stroman, not in the top 250. Jalen Stroman is not one of the 250 best transfer players this year.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to believe this is based on analysis. Well, he was hurt last year. Okay. He was hurt last year, but you have Nick Anderson in your top 15. He was at hurt last year. Some say, well, Will Pauling wasn't good last year. No, Will Pauling wasn't good last year. But he was better than Nick Anderson was last year, who never played it down. You're basing his off of 2 years ago. So 250 portal players, and you don't have Jalen Stroman or Jared Dawson or Will Pauling among your top 250 portal players. And I'm supposed to believe that there's not, from the same outlet that constantly downgrades Notre Dame's players in the high school level. And I'm supposed to believe that this is fair analysis. Really?
Yeah. Jared Dawson not being in there is pretty egregious. Yeah. That's really not that the other players
top 100,
but
because he was a rotation guy. Not among your top 250. Let me see if they go. Do they go past 250? Let me go down here and see. Because now I actually just want to see where they are. So, yeah, they got 350. Let's go down here. Let's go to the top 400 and see if any of these guys pop up in the top 400. So, nope, still no Will Pauling in the top 100. Still no Jared Dawson in the top 400. See, Jalen Stroman shows up as the number 344 overall player in the country. Behind Zion Branch from USC, who didn't even start at USC.
Yeah. That's rough.
Right.
That's rough.
And I'm supposed to believe that these are there's no agendas here. Come on, guys. Come on. He's behind guys that didn't even start. Jared Dawson. Actually, I'm going to keep going until I find Jared Dawson on here.
I was going to say.
Let's go top 500. Is he in the top 500?
At some point, the listing just has to say was in the portal.
Yes. He is behind. Jared Dawson is lower than Zach Pyron. He is lower than Cole Cabana. Most of you are saying who? He is not among the top 600 transfer portal players.
Zach Pyron. Wasn't it the backup for Georgia Tech?
The backup for Georgia Tech, yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So let's them still sick. Now let's go to 700. Like at this point in time, like, did they just not know he was in the portal? I mean, really? Like, just we didn't know he was in the portal. We missed that update. We don't know. Yeah. Jared Dawson is not among the 700 best portal players in the country, and I'm supposed to respect the national analysts over at CBS Sports. They have Denver Harris ranked ahead of Jared Dawson. I'm just going to keep going until we find him. Not in the top 750 either. This is actually just comical at this point in time, Trevor. I'm just kind of having fun with how stupid this is. Let's see if he's in the top 800. Let's go here. Let's get all the way down to top 900. Let's see if we can finally find Jared Dawson, number 764. We've got it. There you go. 763 players, better portal players, not college football players. Portal players were better than Jared Dawson. Okay. Sure, guys. Okay. Let's see, where did Will Pauling? Will Pauling was 664th.
Well,
yes.
Hopefully Jared Dawson has a good breakout game, and I'm already thinking of some really fun article titles to crank out.
Yep.
If he has a multiple sack game.
Yes. Yeah. Pretty good for the guy that ranked 764th in the transfer portal. Actually, you know what, Trev? I'm going to send you this link.
Yeah.
I would like for you to go down and chart all these where all these guys are ranked.
Okay.
Yeah. And just have some fun with that.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, that's enough of the transfer. I just needed to vent a little bit about that because this is the stuff that I'm talking about, Trevor. It's like, okay, you give certain schools the benefit of the doubt, certain players. And I totally get that. If Georgia likes a defensive lineman that I'm not high on, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go rewatch his film because Georgia doesn't take a lot of bums and be like, well, let me see. If Ohio State offers a receiver that I'm not super high on or I've never heard of, I'm going to assume let me go back and watch the film or let me watch the film because if they're going after this kid, there must be something there. At what point in time what does Notre Dame have to do? What does Mike Mickens have to do to eventually say, hey, listen, if Mike Mickens likes this guy, I should probably give this guy another look because he's probably pretty good.
Yeah.
And, it's a little bit frustrating. I'll be honest with you. Jaden Thomas ranked 815th on this list, by the way.
Damn.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny.
Apparently, a Zach Pyron breakout season's on the make.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is he went to Minnesota and then left Minnesota. I don't even know where he's going now.
He should go back to Georgia Tech to boost their transfer portal class rankings.
Absolutely right. Yes, he should. He would give them a boost. That's for sure. He would definitely give them a boost. Yeah. So, but it does frustrate me, Trevor. And does it impact what happens on the field? Not really. But as I've said before, this stuff can impact your perception, especially in an era where NIL is a thing and NIL matters. If a certain school is constantly underappreciated, underrated by the national media, then there's not going to be as much buzz about those particular players, or at least not as many. Jeremiah Love doesn't have that problem. Leonard Moore doesn't necessarily have that problem. Riley Leonard didn't have that problem, but yet we're going to sit there and say, hey, these other guys have that problem. Steve Angeli was ranked 257th, by the way. Somebody asked about Steve Angeli, 257th. So 600 spots ahead of Jared Dawson, 400 spots ahead of Will Pauling. Where was Stroman? A guy who was a multi-year starter in the ACC. Almost 100 spots, about 87 spots ahead of Jalen Stroman. So, yeah. But that's why that stuff frustrates me. And I just needed to vent about it a little bit because it's my channel and I can do that sometimes. So I kind of have some fun with that a little bit. But I just feel like I want to push back on this stuff more and call people out more because some of this stuff is just absolutely ridiculous.
I'm down for that. You let me know.
Kennedy Urlacher was ranked 452nd. Kennedy Urlacher was ranked 200 spots higher than Will Pauling, 300 spots higher than Jared Dawson. Like, come on, guys. And I like Kennedy, but what has he done to have that type of rank? It just, the whole thing is just, oh, boy. Yeah. Pat Coogan, who got dominated by Jared Dawson in their matchup, ranked 138th. Rocco ranked 139th. Neither one of those guys could block Jared Dawson when they played Notre Dame last year. Yeah.
Well, I'll have some fun with those rankings since you sent over that link. But any final thoughts, Brian? Before
no, I've vented enough. I've gone off enough.
Well, listen, folks. That'll do it for the scheduled segments of the show today, but we are getting ready to move over. We have some mailbag questions that we're going to get to. But before we transition over, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, man, we got some mailbag questions that we're gonna get to before we head out of here today. Should be enough time to get to most of them, but again, folks, we got the Friday free for all mailbag tomorrow.
Yeah.
So But we don't have a lot of questions set aside, so I'm ready to rock and roll.
I'm going to read this one, Trev, because I want to get your opinion on this, because I kind of just went off on this a little bit. But the history expert says, at what point do we leave the lazy narrative from the media to the explicit anti-Notre Dame bias? Because I'm already there.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit this offseason so far, is when rankings like that, like there was a post-spring top 25 that came out that had Notre Dame 9th. Those are the ones that it's not even kind of worth my time getting upset over, because it's like I look at it like it's comedy. To Brian's point last segment about like just going to find Jared Dawson where he ranked at 764th. That's something that's just like, okay, guys, like I stop letting things get me super worked up if they're just so egregious that it's like, okay, like there just wasn't any thought put into this. And that's where I look at a lot of these, because it is lazy. It is lazy. And honestly, teams are being evaluated kind of lazy even outside of Notre Dame on both ends of the spectrum.
Right. It's not just Notre Dame that's getting crap.
Yeah.
Like we've talked about, Texas A&M is one that you're just like, hold on a second.
Yeah.
You're gonna have Texas A&M outside the top 25, but LSU in the top 5.
Right. We're gonna have Texas A&M out of the top 25, but Texas Tech at 16th. You know, it's stuff like that, and so it's the laziness goes beyond Notre Dame. But this is something that I've referenced before. It's just something that I grew up around. It was always Notre Dame is never as good as what people think, even in the seasons that they are. Notre Dame was a good football team in 2018. Notre Dame was a good football team in 2015. But it always gets downplayed, and it always gets just shoved down your throat of like, I mean, but you're Notre Dame. And so there is a part of me that I just let it roll off the back. But where I don't is when the inconsistencies in the top 7, that's what I don't let go. That's the stuff where it's like, okay, like I understand you're a national person and you can't realistically cover all 134 FBS teams the same level. But you can't take the extra 10 minutes to do a little bit more digging on Notre Dame, who you already know should be in your top 10. You can't do that. I mean, us here at Irish Break, we're not national people, but we did enough research to put together a top 25. Come on. And we don't even claim to be top, like, national analysts as it is. So that's where I get a little bit frustrated with the anti-Notre Dame stuff. Like if someone's going to put Notre Dame outside of their top 7, I don't really pay too much attention to it, because it's like, okay, so like you really just don't. I mean, you're going to there's some writers that will leave out Leonard Moore as a key returning player. That's just
ESPN.
Yeah. Like, do I think it's silly? 100%.
6 players listed. Other schools had like as many as 14.
Mm-hmm.
Notre Dame had 6.
Yep. And that shows me that it's like you're just going based on memory of who you remember being at this team.
Yeah.
Which that's fine, but that's lazy, and I just let that roll off the back. So, you know, to your question, I'm also already there. I still have to look at it with some validity for the points that Brian brought up, because there is an effect. There's a camp of people that it's like, I mean, the only thing that matters is a natty. I mean, yeah, duh. But
then that should also be true for Texas and Oregon and Penn State and everybody not named Ohio State, Clemson, Alabama, or Georgia.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Like there's some people that believe that preseason rankings carry no weight. I disagree. There's some people that think the transfer portal rankings carry no weight. I also disagree.
Right.
So that's where I'm at with this one.
Yeah.
History expert.
I think it depends on the entity. I absolutely think 247 Sports has an anti-Notre Dame bias. I think one of the reasons why is their lead evaluator, ranking guy, covered Notre Dame early in his career. Fans used to bust his chops all the time. He'd get in his feelings. He got all butthurt about it. And then he's been basically trashing Notre Dame ever since. Basically is what I believe is going on. And it's like you can't be that bad at rankings to constantly have to be that wrong about that team's players. Especially when they go out and prove you wrong on the field. I flat out do. I don't think Mark Schlabach, I don't know that Mark Schlabach has an anti-Notre Dame bias. I just think it has more to do with a lazy Notre Dame bias because he's still holding on to things that were once true about Notre Dame relatively recently. I mean, guys, let's not act like what Marcus Freeman did this year is something that has been happening in Notre Dame for 5 years and they're still not respecting him for it.
Totally.
I mean, we're a year removed from watching Notre Dame get their butts kicked by Louisville on national TV and go down and choke a game away against Clemson. I mean, so some of this is like, dude, I get it. And that's why I said a year ago, you were talking about a team, like I understood why Notre Dame didn't get as much respect a year ago as I thought they should have. So look, I'd have them higher than 10, but you have them anywhere from like 7 to 10, 8 to 11. Okay, I'm fine with it. Yeah. Now it's like if you have them outside top 5, I don't even know what to say to you right now at this point in time. I have no clue what to say to you. Well, they lost Riley Leonard. Okay. Well, look at all these other teams that lost their starting quarterbacks, and you're not saying anything about them. And well, they lost Xavier Watts. Okay. And Ohio State lost. Look, I mean, like that's the frustration that I have is I think a lot of it's just lazy narratives. I think some of it is you don't want to be the guy that jumps on a bandwagon all alone, and then you're wrong, and then you look stupid.
Yeah.
It's like with a lot of things. Well, if I go with why do people go with joining the bandwagon? Like, why do people do that? It's so that if you are wrong, you can say, well, so is everybody else. It's easy that way. It takes no fortitude or any courage to say, I'm going to go out and pick that team to be in, because if you're wrong, then, you look silly. Like, I've always respected draft analysts that are willing to take bold stances on players that I'm like, dude, there's no way that's going to turn out to be true, but that's your evaluation. You're putting it out there. I respect that, because if you're wrong, everybody that when you're right, nobody comes back and I mean, your own fans will, but nobody else is going to come back and be like, dude, you nailed that one. You think I ever got respect from LSU fans for being like one of the only few people out there that has any kind of national presence that predicted them to go to the playoff in 2019? No, I don't. They don't remember that. But if I say LSU sucks this year and they're going to be outside the top 25 and they go to the playoff, you better darn well believe that they're going to come back like, hey, what happened there? That's just that's the nature of it, and people don't want to deal with that. I'm like, well, look, everybody else thought they were going to suck, so I just, I thought the same thing everybody else did. Well, how about you be more bold than that? Like, how about you actually make your own evaluation? And people have asked me, why don't you read other Notre Dame sites? Why don't you listen to other podcasts and stuff about Notre Dame? Do you not like the other Notre Dame beat? I'm like, no, I think very highly of several people that cover the team. I'm friends with several guys. But my whole thing is I want to make sure my evaluation is mine. I don't want to be tainted by, well, all these people are saying this. Now, I may do some stuff after the fact, after I come up with my rankings. So like Tim O'Malley and I used to have this thing where we would kind of just have some fun with some crazy preseason rankings. But you do it on your own, and then we share it with each other and talk about it. But it's like, imagine what my rankings would look like if I looked at his first. I'm like, well, I'm do that. Guarantee I'm not going to lose if I looked at his rankings and just wrote the same things down that he did. I can't lose, because if I'm wrong, so's he. But it's when you're willing to take a bold stance, and that's not a popular stance, then all of a sudden people look at you and they're like, and people don't want to deal with the social media stuff that comes to Notre Dame, because a lot of fans are still, Notre Dame sucks, they're overrated. And you put Notre Dame high, that's all that some people are going to focus on.
Yep.
So I think some of it's that. I don't think it's the same for everybody. I think some of it's anti-Notre Dame bias. Some of it is that's built on things that shouldn't be part of your anti-Notre Dame bias. Some anti-Notre Dame bias is built on, well, yeah, that's what Notre Dame was for 30 years. So I can understand Mark Schlabach being a little slow to come around on Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I don't agree with that. I think it's kind of silly, some of the things he wrote, but it's like the laziness isn't that you have Notre Dame 7th. It's that you clearly don't have you don't know this team. That is why you have them 7th. That's my problem.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I have the issue. And so that's where I get mad. It's not that, hey, you picked Ohio State to win that game, I picked Notre Dame. You're a Notre Dame hater. No, I can understand why you would predict that.
Sure.
It's not that. It's the fact that your analysis shows me you don't have a clue about this Notre Dame football team. And if you give me a fair evaluation of this team and you still have them ranked lower than other teams, I can respect that. But when you have them ranked lower and it's obvious to me that you put way more emphasis into studying that team and you'll make any excuse necessary to defend that team, But this team, you're focusing on a bunch of crap that you should be focusing on. And you show me you don't know who this guy is or that guy is, then that says, hey man, you're lazy, you're unprofessional, and that's what I have an issue with, more so than just saying that guy hates Notre Dame. That guy hates Notre Dame. And again, for guys, if we're being honest, for a long time, national people had every reason to say Notre Dame wasn't as good as other top teams. It didn't have the athletes of other top teams. This whole Notre Dame lacks athleticism thing didn't come out of nowhere. It isn't some like, well, they're all Northern Catholics and Northern Catholics can't run. No, that's not what it's because they watched Notre Dame in every big game they played in for 20 years be the far inferior team athletically for the most part. That's where it was earned. You earned that reputation. I watched them for a decade be a far inferior team to USC on the football field. USC has way better athletes than Notre Dame. But if you're still saying that today, then you're just lazy, not smart, or you have an anti-Notre Dame bias. And that's my opinion.
Yep. It's a lack of consistency for me. I hate it. Coach Ben 574, if you were going to go with a 3 defensive end rush package, who would you play and where?
A 3 defensive end rush package. I would go with Bryce Young. If everybody's healthy, I'd go with Bryce Young. I'd go with Boubacar Traore. And I'd probably go with Logan Thomas. And I'd maybe put Bryce a little bit inside at times and maybe Boubacar. Because if I'm going with a 3-end rush package, it's not 3rd and 3. It's most likely 3rd and 7 or 8 or something like that. And I'm going to have, or it's 2-minute, and they've got a minute 10 and they're not running the football. They got a minute 20, no timeouts. They're not running power. I'm not, or if they are, I'm like, good. Because you know what I mean? Like, we want you to do that. But that'd probably be mine. I mean, I'm okay with Josh Burnham being in there in certain looks. I'm okay with Jordan Patel in certain looks, but that'd probably be my 3. I assume that was your 3 as well.
I would.
You're like, man, please don't say Logan Thomas. Please don't say Logan Thomas.
I was like, dude, I'm about to Logan Thomas and
blow this sucker up, man, with my take. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, we're on the same page. We're on the same page.
Yep.
Jared Ginn, how many quarterbacks do you expect the Irish to offer in 2027, and when do you think the offers will go out?
I would expect them to go out within the next week or two. This is the last week on the road. I believe this is their last week on the road. They're still seeing some more quarterbacks this week. So I would imagine they're going to come back, talk, go over film, discuss what they saw on the road, and then throw out some offers. I think whether or not how many offers they send out is going to depend on how they feel they stand with their top guys. Like if they think, hey, I think we can get this guy and I really like this guy, let's offer him. They may only offer him, and that's a recruiting tactic to say, hey, we went out and saw all these guys and you're the only one we're offering because you think you're going to get that kid. Now you better get that kid because if you don't, you just alienated a lot of other guys. I would say I think they'll probably throw out no more than 5 to 7 would be the most, maybe less. I could see 3 to 5 guys in like an initial wave. Like if it was up to me, I'm offering Peyton Houston right now. I'm offering Malachi Ziegler right now. I'm offering Peter Bork right now, or Bork right now, or Bork, I should say, right now. There might be a couple others, and there's a couple guys I still got to watch. But like those 3, I'd offer all 3 of them right now.
Yeah,
and there's a couple other guys on the board that I like as well.
Good deal. Tommy Guns, who has the best chance to be that menace of the year? For example, the guy that outproduces what he should due to receiving less attention from the opponent.
I kind of feel like it's who we talked a lot earlier in the show. It's the Z position. It's Jordan Faison and potentially Will Pauling if he plays some out there. I think that's a position that's going to get the least amount of attention in the Notre Dame offense. Defensively, it's good. I don't know who that's going to be on defense because I don't know who's going to not get attention. On defense, it's a little different because the guys that aren't as good get more attention from the defense because, hey, we're going to go at that guy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit different. But on offense, I'd say it's that Z position, which right now I anticipate being Jordan Faison, but we could also see Will Pauling play that position, and we could see some other guys play that position as well.
I think I'm going to go with a quarterback here. I think there's going to be a lot of attention to stopping the run game with how much hype that Jeremiah Love is getting, rightfully so, coming into this season. Notre Dame's running back room as a whole, a lot of people have been talking about their offensive line. I think there's a chance that whoever the Notre Dame quarterback is, whether it be CJ or Kenny, may put up some higher numbers than what people are expecting early in the season because it's like, hey, we're loading the box. This is a young, inexperienced cat under center. And like we just got done talking about, people far and wide aren't really talking that much about Will Pauling, and some people are talking about Jaden Greathouse and Malachi Fields, but it's not the masses in the way that other receiving cores are being talked about. It would not shock me if Notre Dame quarterbacks put up better numbers early in the season than what people are projecting.
I could see that. I didn't think about that from the quarterback position, Trev. That's a very interesting way of looking at it. So you're saying like the quarterback position could outproduce because people are so focused on stopping the run game. Good one.
Yep. So I think week in and week out, people are like, we can't let 4 beat us. And I think as the season goes on, that conversation will go to, okay, which do we choose? Do we let 13 or 8 beat us, or do we let 4 and 24 beat us?
Yeah.
Question from Salty. What is your over-under on public commitments by the end of May?
So what have they had so far in May? They've had 2 or 3 in May. Give me a second. I know they had the 2 most recent ones. They've had 3 in May. They've had the 2 running backs plus Tiki. Have they had any others? I think that's the only 3 so far in May. Give me a second. Let me pull up the commitment list by date. All right. So they've had 3 and 4 in May because they also got Jacoby Clapper.
Oh, okay. Okay.
In May, they got Jacoby Clapper, Javian Osborne, Tiki Hola, Jonas Walton. Now, Rodney Dunham was early April. And then they signed 1 or 3. They landed commitments from 3, 4, 5 guys in April. So 4. I'm going to say if I was setting an over-under on May commitments, I'd go 6.5, including the ones I already have. I think there's a chance they could get 2 more for like between now and the end of May, and then maybe more. But I will say this also, there's none right now that are slated to commit in May. But there's a lot of Jacoby Clapper wasn't expected to commit in May. Tiki Hola was, but Jonas Walton was not originally planning on committing in May. He kind of went on an official and was doing, and it just kept coming back to Notre Dame. So he's like, hey, let's do this thing. And I think Javian Osborne's decision sped up his decision a little bit. Javian Osborne was originally going to take officials and then commit after those. So all the kids that Aiden Pouncey was going to commit in mid-May, he ended up committing in late April. Rodney Dunham was not planning on committing in this spring at all. And then the Notre Dame visit happens and he commits like 2 weeks later. Bubba Frazier was not expected to commit soon. He then visits on the 4th, his first ever visit, and commits a week later. So there's always types of things like that. There's 2 guys on defense that I could see just saying, you know what, I'm done. I'm ready to wrap this thing up. There's a couple guys on offense I could see do that. But I don't know that right now Notre Dame is pushing to have guys commit. Like the guys that upped their decision dates were not because Notre Dame pressured them to. It's just they knew that, look, if you want to be in this class, and I think that's where their recruiting strategy has been smart because there's guys they've been in a good position with, but then they go out and just offer more guys to let them know, like, hey, listen, we're not going to be able to wait around for you. If you want to be part of this, you need to jump on board, and that strategy's worked. They don't say it directly, but the conversation is there. So I could see – so 6.5 would mean they get 2 or 3 more. And I don't know that I'd take the over on that, but it's possible. Like in my head right now, Trevor, I can think of 4 guys that I could see doing that. But I don't know that they're going to.
Fair enough.
I'll ask this one, Trev, because my opinion's known on this. I think BYU is going to be really good this year. Salty Virginia Peanuts asks, will BYU improve or decline this season? What's your take on that, Trev?
I think they're going to improve. I'm not as high on BYU as most. I don't think they're going to be bad by any means. I think they will be relatively similar to who they were last season, which was a very good football team. But if I had to choose between improve or decline, I would definitely say improve from where they were. Big 12 teams historically they're really difficult to evaluate right now because of what we've seen that conference be the last 12 months. It's kind of the Wild West. It would not shock me if by November BYU was the top of the conference. They're going to have to finish their season strong, unlike what they did last year. But yeah, I think they will err more on the side of improving. I don't see them declining. Love their coach. They're still going to have a really good defense, like the talent that they have coming back. So yeah, I would go with improve if I had to choose one or the other. Chief Brody, is Notre Dame going to fight back about the Clemson game not counting as an ACC opponent?
I think we're overreacting to that a little bit. I kind of warned you guys what was going to happen about this when we first talked about it. This is a negotiating tactic with the ACC. Of course, they're going to come out and say right away, those aren't going to count. The games don't start for 2 years. They need to say that. Why? Because Notre Dame wants to renegotiate the ACC deal. Not the ACC deal. Let me be clear. The ACC schedule. And they're using it from the standpoint of, hey, there's Cal, Stanford, and SMU now. And so we need to get those teams on our schedule. So you need to kind of blow the whole thing up and redo it. Well, Notre Dame in that discussion is going to want certain things. We want to play Miami more. We want to play Clemson more. We want to play this team more. So I think Notre Dame's acting all indignant about this because they want to then, well, if you're not going to let us have this, then you need to make sure you give us this. The ACC is saying, well, if you're going to play Clemson over here, then we still need to make sure you're not going to count that. You scheduled that without us. We still want to make sure we get you 5 ACC teams. Why would the ACC not want to do that? So, look, this is negotiation. That's all this is. Of course, Notre Dame wants to count that as one of their ACC deals, or because that means they can then schedule more non-ACC opponents. But Pete Bavach was not like floored by the idea that, oh my God, I can't believe the ACC is doing this. So the whole thing is just it's a negotiation tactic. The ACC is going to push back on what Notre Dame wants.
Yeah. And
they're going to have that. Well, fine. If you want this, then you need to give us this. Well, Notre Dame will then say, well, we don't want that, but we'll give you this. And then they'll find their negotiation. Because again, this is a deal that doesn't start for 2 more years. And I believe the first year was already on the schedule. Wasn't 27 one of the years that was already on the schedule?
Yeah, I think 27 and 28 were already on the schedule. And
it's only the 4 years. It's only the 8 years that weren't already part of the schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So let me find this real quick. So I had it at one point in time where they had all the different years kind of mapped out for Notre Dame and the ACC. I want to try to find this here real quick, but I believe that the 27 and 28 as you were saying, Trev, was already on there. So 2027, Clemson was already on there. 2028 at home against Clemson was already on there. So Clemson was already scheduled for 27, 28,
there were
31, and 34 were already on there. Those will still count, but this is just part of the negotiation tactic by both sides. Yep. So no, Notre Dame shouldn't fight back against it. They should keep negotiating. This is a business. Yeah. And it's the ACC is not just going to roll over and let Notre Dame dictate everything they want to do in the league. They've got to push back and then get their concessions, and that's all this is. And I have no problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the ACC should do. ACC's job is not to do whatever they can to make Notre Dame happy. To a degree, they need to keep Notre Dame happy, but you don't just roll over and let them just dictate everything to you. You can't do that.
Agreed.
And as far as why it shouldn't count, why does the ACC have this stance? Because that's a question from Salty. Essentially, it's you want to be able to get more teams playing Notre Dame. And if Clemson, Florida State, and Miami are dominating those, then all that's going to do is create more of a gap between those three schools and the rest financially, because there is this new thing of that they're going to be going to where TV ratings factor into how much money you get from your TV deal. So they want to try to make sure that the whole league gets healthy, not just the top three perceived teams. They want to make sure that Wake can get theirs and Duke can get theirs and Georgia Tech can get theirs. So you want to make sure that you're trying to do right by those programs as well. Because that's the other way your league can break up, is those teams at the bottom just get so bad and so that struggle so much. They're just like, dude, this isn't working for us. We got to get out. We're tired of Clemson and this team dominating us. Like, we could literally go join the AAC and make more money than what we're making right now.
True.
I'm not saying that's – I mean, it's like if it got to that point, you something like, hey, I'm going to go join the Big 12 because they'll pay us more than what the ACC does. And so you got to be careful with that. So it's smart business.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Let's get to this last one, Trev, right here from Archer, because I thought this was interesting, and we'll end with this one.
An Ohio State representative has proposed legislation to prohibit any in-state football team from playing an AP top 10 matchup any earlier than 3:30 p.m. The team up north accepted it. Thoughts?
As someone who has spent a decent amount of time in Ohio, I continue to be amazed at how many football-related things that this state legislature thinks that they should be spending their time on. Why? Like, hey, how about you guys address the opioid crisis? How about you guys go ahead and deal with what's going on in East Palatine? Is they're still dealing with some of the things, or Palestine, they're still doing some things they're dealing with. You know, how about you guys deal with, trying to get more manufacturing jobs back and do things to where the population doesn't continue to decrease in your state? How about you guys deal with that, what you were elected to do, not wasting a second on a bill that talks about when a football team is going to start a game? Are you serious? You are not, we are not, our politicians are so unserious. So unserious. Our governor in Indiana is an unserious person. Our state senator, Todd Young, is not a serious person. You could, and go to another state, go to Virginia, there's so many unserious people. Let's vote on this so we don't actually have to vote on things that actually matter. It is so stupid. Why are you wasting time on this? You want to sign this deal with these TV networks, and then when they put you in times that allow them to make the most money, you then want to cry about it? Why do they have Ohio State in so many big noon games? Why? Because that's how they can make the most money. If playing Ohio State at 3:30 every week made them the most money, guess when Ohio State would play? 3:30. Like, we're so dumb, Trevor. It just infuriates me. Like, it's so dumb. This is what you're wasting time on. This is what your state voted you in for. But you know what? Having grew up in Ohio, that's actually probably a more important topic to a lot of people in Ohio than, how safe is your drinking water? What is your are you still having to pay property taxes? Like, why do I have to pay property taxes to my state when I'm supposedly own this land? You've turned me into a perpetual renter of my own land, right? Because if I don't pay it, you take my house, so I don't own it. That doesn't matter to you, but I'm boycotting. No more noon kickoffs. This is why they keep doing what they're doing, because we're dumb enough to keep electing people that keep doing this stuff. Bro, focus on more important things than whatever time Ohio State kicks off a freaking football game that's going to make them millions of dollars. Now, if a guy wanted to say, hey, listen, we need to talk to the Big Ten about this, and this, because moving it back to 3:30, it can help our city and help. There are things to be said, but that's also true of the other 17 teams you have in your league. So they're the ones that have to do this stuff too. So it is just so dumb. So dumb that we're focusing on this type of thing. And like, you really think a state legislation, it's also going to have it's going to have no bearing. They have no say in this at all. They can pass whatever rule they want. Big Ten's just going to be like, we're not going to honor that. You don't have any right to pass this legislation. You can pass it all you want. We're going to ignore it. Big Ten's not incorporated in Ohio. They're not based in Ohio. It's just all for show. It's a waste of our time. Absolute waste of our time.
Yeah, I was about to say, what does state legislature have to do with the Big Ten? If that's what you want to
It's not like
propose,
they'll
then
fine them X amount. You have nothing that you can actually do to trigger that.
oh yeah, I mean,
you have no
then,
jurisdiction over the Big Ten in that regard.
yeah, and then if that's the case, then Ohio State can enjoy playing top 10 road games. Like, I mean, if there's actually going to be any sort of financial repercussion for the Big Ten, it's like, fine, then we won't play it in Ohio. That stinks to be you, but whatever. Yeah,
we're
my
just
thoughts
an
on it.
unserious people, man. We are.
Yeah. Yep. Super chat from Raymond Horton. Thank you, Raymond. IB is the best.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
I think that's a good way to take us out of here today, Brian.
So
all right, folks. Well, that'll do it for today's show. Covered a lot of different content, but don't worry because we will be back on Friday, tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. So if there's any questions we didn't get to today, go ahead and bring them on in tomorrow. But tomorrow, it is all mailbag. You guys will get to dictate the topics of conversation for tomorrow. Tonight, IB Nation Sports Talk goes live at 5 p.m. Make sure you have the notification bell and the subscription bell hit so you know exactly when Irish Breakdown goes live. Before you head out of here today, please be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. But of course, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. Till tomorrow at 1 p.m., that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.